122 and the top of page 123. Court went on, and at the end of the day, at the bottom of page 124, beginning on line 17, Your Honor stated, all right, I think we'll just have to take up the testimony and the objections as it comes along. So I think what we would ask the court to do is to reconsider the exclusion of what was then became the proffered testimony as to the percentages of House District 59 and Senate District 27 that were moved in and moved out by the special master. Dr. Chen testified on direct examination and on cross-examination that the changes were small, that they affected only a minority of population. Those were opinions that he offered in this case, and we have the right to rebut those opinions. And we've done so through the testimony of Dr. Johnson, who established that those percentages, in fact, were very significant. And in the case of the House, were nearly 50% of the district by population. So on that basis,
my question at that time, and it is now, these demonstrative exhibits demonstrate maps drawn by the special master. Is that correct?
Well, they demonstrate many things, Your Honor, but the relevant page that we're focused on is sort of a before and after comparison of House District 59 and Senate District 27 to show changes by the special master to those districts.
And how long have those maps been in the public record, namely what the special master drew and what the district looked like before the special master redrew it?
Well, presumably from the moment the maps were adopted, so well before.
So why is it such a novel thing that Dr. Chen is presenting a demonstrative exhibit that shows a map that was drawn more than a year ago to show a change that the special master made? Why is that something that your experts could not have examined had they seen it as relevant some time ago?
Your Honors, the real focus of what we asked Dr. Johnson to look at was the claim, the characterization that Dr. Chen made during his direct and his cross-examination testimony at trial concerning the scope of the change. He offered an opinion, he offered a characterization of the degree of that change. And he did so to try to minimize the effect of those changes to the districts. Because if you recall, he chose not to freeze those districts, and the argument was, well, wait a minute, if that's the case, if the special master informed the drawing of that district, does that, what impact does that have on his analysis? Does that mean that the special master drew a gerrymander? Was, I think, one of the questions that Mr. Farr asked, and that Dr. Chen responded to and leveraged those demonstratives to respond to. So if Dr. Chen is offering an opinion as to the scale of the changes to those districts by population, we should have the right to rebut that testimony with a calculation of the population that has been moved. That is all we are seeking to do.
May I consult with counsel for a second?
You may consult with counsel. Is to put into evidence the amount of population that is in the changes made by the special master under the direction of the Covington Court. Is that the sole purpose of this conversation we're having right now?
That is correct.
Your expert did no analysis of that county to determine whether it was a gerrymandered county or it was drawn in a way. I mean, there was no analytical analysis. As I understand it, the sole analytical analysis he did was with respect to Mecklenburg County. I believe that's what came out yesterday. So we're talking about just raw population numbers. Is that what we're trying to get into evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. And in fact, all we would ask is that what we put forward as the proffer of what his testimony would have been just simply be accepted as testimony, and they can cross-examine. We're not going to ask any further questions on it. What's in the record is what's in the record.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll be brief considering how much time this has already taken up. Just a couple things I'd like to note. The portion of the transcript that I read to you yesterday is on the top of page 123 here, where Your Honor said specifically population densities is not something that Dr. Chen testified about. And in fact, he didn't say a single word about population. He was just showing land, basically, overlaying it. Obviously, we relied on that ruling, so we haven't confirmed that they're numbers. Just looking at the face of it, though, they seem to be wildly misleading, the numbers that were presented yesterday by Dr. Johnson. But I'll not take up any more time on this issue than we already have.
Just a very minor point there, Your Honors. Again, I return to, and we have provided, at least from the cross-examination testimony and the highlighted portions of the transcript we handed up at pages 18 to 22 and pages 49 to 50, where Dr. Chen makes very specific representations of a small population. I would add to that, Your Honors, that although Mr. Jacobson represents that there was no testimony about population, well, he said in a cross-examination, he actually said in direct examination on the morning of July 16th, again, that small population change. Further, at page 101 of the transcript on re-cross-examination, he even admits he calculated the population that moved in and out of the districts. He calculated it, but chose not to disclose it to the court. We think that the court needs to decide this case on the basis of the full record, not on the basis of Dr. Chen's loose characterization when he calculated the number and knows what the number is. Finally, regarding Mr. Jacobson's claim of surprise, we had an agreement on the exchange of demonstratives. It was 7 p.m. the night before the direct. We complied. He had the demonstrative from Dr. Johnson. He would have been prepared to have cross-examined Dr. Johnson even yesterday on that exhibit. There's no prejudice, particularly since Dr. Chen already made the calculation and so testified. Thank you.
All right, we'll take it under advisement and give you a ruling after we've had an opportunity to consider it. And if necessary, we'll recall witnesses to determine what the population of the area moved by the special master a year ago actually was. Further cross-examination for this witness?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning.
You submitted 3 reports in this case. Your opening report on April 30th, a supplemental report about a week later, and then your rebuttal of Dr. Chen's rebuttal in June. Is that right?
Yes.
And you personally performed all of the analysis in those reports, is that right?
Yes.
And nobody sort of performed the analysis for you and then just handed it to you and said, can you sign this for me, I assume?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to shift gears a little bit from where we left off yesterday and focus on or start with your overlap analysis, or analysis of how much of Dr. Hoffler's June map corresponded to or overlapped with the final enacted plan. And I'd like to start by just walking through my understanding of how you did that analysis, and you can just tell me if I'm getting anything wrong along the way. Sound good?
Okay.
So in your overlap analysis, you excluded any county that you considered locked because it's kept whole under the enacted plan, right?
If it was kept whole because of the county groupings rule, yeah, and I don't think there were any that were, well, they wouldn't have been kept whole if they didn't have to be kept whole. So yeah, correct.
So if we have a district that is sort of one whole county and then a fragment of a second county, and that's the district, you excluded the part of the district that's the whole county and only looked at the fragment that's part of a county. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so what you did is you then analyzed the overlap between Dr. Hoffler's draft maps and the final enacted maps for essentially all of the counties that are divided across more than one district. That's the basis for your overlap analysis?
They weren't also locked because they're the same as 2011.
Fair enough, fair enough. If we could pull up Johnson demonstrative D7 from yesterday. And Dr. Johnson, just to confirm, this map that we see on the top part, that's reproduced in your rebuttal report, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And the black and the gray counties here, those are the counties that you consider locked. Is that right?
Yes.
And so the counties that have colors, those are the counties over which you say the map maker had some discretion, and so those are the counties and the districts for which you perform your overlap analysis. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And if we look at, in fact, the bottom left there, where you say the amount of population subject to map maker discretion, the number in the bottom left of this chart, that you're referring then to the population of people who live in those counties that have colors. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So for all of those districts that have colors, you analyze how much those districts in Dr. Hoffler's draft map overlapped with the final enacted plan, and that's the basis for the numbers you then produce on the right side of this demonstrative. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And so if we could just zoom in on the colors on the right. Can I see this? My eyes are not so good. And just to clarify, where it says 36%, sorry, the numbers on the right side of that. Where it says 36%, that's your analysis under your similarity, I think you call it a similarity index, is that right?
Yes.
Of how much of the population was moved between Dr. Hoffler's draft map and the final enacted plan, right?
Yes.
And so it's a little bit confusing, at least to me on this chart, because then you sort of invert the percentages on the bottom. So just to make it apples to apples, because on the bottom you're calculating the percentage of the population that's not moved using Dr. Chen's methodology, right?
Yes, there's some differences in the methodologies.
Sure.
So you can't just flip them.
You can't
Flip them.
So, but just looking at the top of your chart, your methodology, under the way you're counting it, you would say that 64% of the population in the house map, was overlapped or was not moved from Dr. Hoffler's draft map to the final enacted house plan. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to now hand out Plaintiff's Exhibit 1021. May we approach her?
Yes.
We'll give you guys copies. Stand up. Make sure the witness gets one. That wouldn't be fair.
Thank you.
Dr. Johnson, this is the Excel sheet that you produced as backup for your analysis, right?
It appears to be, yes.
You recognize this as the Excel sheet that you produced?
Yeah, it doesn't have the file name on it, but it looks like it. The file name on it, but it looks like it.
Will you accept my representation that we just made some screenshots of your Excel file with no alterations?
Sure.
Okay, let's walk through then this spreadsheet and how that then feeds into your calculations. The numbers, if we look at column D, which says H314, that represents the district numbers under the enacted plan, right?
One of them is the enacted plan and one is the Hoffler map. Don't have my key.
Sure.
When I'm
Actually,
working, I have a little key next to me, but I'm not sure which is which. But
we'll
one of
make
them
this easy. We'll hand out 1023. May we approach again?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
You recognize this as one of the files you produced in your backup, is that right?
Yes.
And if we look at the key here, you can see that H314 equals the 2017 adopted map, right?
Yes.
Okay. And H313 represents the Dr. Hoffler's June 28th draft map?
Yes.
Okay, if we could go back to the spreadsheet now. So the numbers in column D here, where it says H314, those represent the district numbers in the enacted map. Yes?
Yes.
And the numbers in the column to the left of it, column C, where it says H313, those represent the district numbers in Dr. Hoffler's draft map.
Yes.
And then if we look at column B, those represent your calculations of how much of the population overlaps between the two districts that are listed right next to it, right? So for instance, for this first row, you calculate that there's 4,315 people who are in District 10 in the enacted plan, and who were also were in the district labeled District 28 in Dr. Hoffler's draft map, right?
Yes.
And if we just go the next row down, you calculate that there's 3,381 people who are in District 10 in the enacted plan, who are also assigned to the district labeled District 10 in Dr. Hoffler's draft map, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then what I understand you do is for every district listed in column D, so in the enacted plan, you determine which district in Dr. Hoffler's draft map had the highest overlap, right? And for that pair, you then calculate this overlap percentage we see in column H. Is that right?
Yes.
So for this first row, you determine that, District 10 in the enacted map, the corresponding district that has the highest overlap in the Dr. Hoffler's draft map was District 28, and then you calculate the overlap percentage between the two in column H, right?
Correct.
Okay. And if we could just then, and you do this for every district in the enacted map over which you say the map maker had discretion.
Yes.
The ones with the colors from the prior chart.
Yes.
Okay. If we could then just look at the end of this spreadsheet and do a split screen here with the map we were just looking at in D7, or the D7 itself. And just highlight on the map, John, if you could, the numbers on the bottom right, all of the numbers there. Yeah. And then on the spreadsheet, zoom in on the numbers there. And so we'll see here, it's a little bit small, that the numbers at the bottom of your spreadsheet here, the one that's highlighted that says 64%, that corresponds right to the 36% on your chart. That's what we were just talking about. It's just 100 minus 36, right?
Yes.
And if we look at the number on the very bottom right, where it says 74.5%, that's what you calculate using Dr. Chen's methodology, which corresponds to the 74.5% that we see on your D7, right?
Yes. I'm actually pulling it from the 25.5. It's just below the left of it, but it's the same number.
It's the same number. And that all flows down from the columns we were just looking at above in the Excel sheet, right?
Yes.
Okay. If we could go back to D7, just D7. And just to clarify again, the colors that have districts, those are the colors that went into the analysis that we just saw, over which you say Dr. Hull. Sorry. The colors that have districts, just because this is confusing, I just want to say it again. Those are the ones over which you say Dr. Hoffler, as the map maker, had discretion and went into your overlap analysis.
Yes.
Okay. If we could focus on the two districts in Granville County, which are at the sort of center top there that are yellow and green. Do you see those?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we could do a split screen between that and Plaintiff's Exhibit 132. Dr. Johnson, you recognize this as one of the charts in Dr. Chen's rebuttal report, Plaintiff's Exhibit 132.
Yes.
And you can see here that Dr. Hoffler's draft map was an exact match for the districts in the final plan in Granville County, right? 100% overlap?
Yes.
And the reason why it looks different, just for people looking at it, is you only put in colors the Granville County portions of this because you say the other ones are locked, right? So the yellow and the green in your D7 just corresponds to Granville County in Dr. Chen's map, right?
I'm not sure I followed that question.
So if we look at your D7, you see the districts that are highlighted green and yellow?
Yes.
That corresponds to Granville County in Dr. Chen's chart, right? You can see they're the exact same?
Yes.
Okay. And these are district numbers you could see 2 and 32 in the enacted plan, right?
Yes, the portions from the other 3 counties are locked by the traversal rule.
But
Locked by the traversal rule.
right, but these portions of 2 and 32 are not locked by the traversal rule and have 100% overlap, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can we now do a split screen between Plaintiff's Exhibit 132 and the Excel spreadsheet we were just looking at, Plaintiff's Exhibit 1021? So again, column D in your Excel spreadsheet represents the districts under the enacted map. Dr. Johnson, where are districts 2 and 32 in your spreadsheet?
I don't see them in here.
You forgot to include them.
I would have to go back and look at my work to see what the calculations were with those.
But you would concede that in this backup file, districts 2 and 32, they're not there. They don't appear to be there, right?
Right.
And I can represent to you, we went back and we checked this thoroughly. Obviously, your counsel can ask you about this on redirect. You just forgot to include them, right?
No, it's something when coding it that, I don't go through these maps block by block. There's coding that I do in Maptitude to tag the different blocks, and I have to go back and look and see what happened with those.
But Dr. Johnson, column D lists the district numbers for the enacted plan. We just established that. You have a bunch of districts here. You don't have districts 2 and 32, which are 100% overlap. Right?
Right.
Okay. And if you had included those 2 districts that are 100% overlap, that would have raised the average overlap that you would have calculated had you properly included those districts, right? Because they're 100% overlap.
It would have. I don't know the population of those pieces of Granville County to tell you whether it be a substantive change or not.
Okay, but it would have increased it by some extent.
Some percentage. It could be tiny or large. I have no idea.
Okay. If we can now go back to D7 and do a split screen with Plaintiff's Exhibit 133. And looking at D7, do you see the 3 districts on sort of the right side there that are pink, blue, and purple in Pitt County? John, if you could circle those.
Yes.
And those are districts over which the map maker had some discretion, right, according to your map?
Yes.
Okay. And if we look at Dr. Chen's figure on the right, Plaintiff's Exhibit 133, you can see that those 3 districts, which are districts 8, 9, and 12, those all perfectly match between Dr. Hoffler's draft map and the final map, right?
Yes, I didn't review that slide myself, but that's what it says on it.
Okay. And if we can now do a split screen between Plaintiff's Exhibit 133 and your Excel spreadsheet again? Dr. Johnson, you didn't include any of these three districts either, did you? 8, 9, or 12?
No.
So you again forgot to include three districts that have a perfect 100% overlap between Dr. Hoffler's draft map and the final plan, 100% overlap, right?
They're not included, just as I sit here, could be because they were unchanged from 2011, and just because the whole county as a whole wasn't, I missed graying it, but I don't know.
I can represent to you, Dr. Johnson, those three Pitt County districts were not unchanged from 2011. And in fact, that's why you had them in colors on D7, right? Because those are ones over which the mapmaker has some discretion, right?
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Just trying to think of why.
And so that now we've reached 5 total districts that you didn't include in your overlap analysis that actually were 100% overlap, right?
No, we reached pieces of 5 districts that were not included.
Okay, fair enough. If we could pull up, if we go back, keep the Excel sheet on the left side, but now pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 127. And Dr. Johnson, you can see in Plaintiff's Exhibit 127 that that district in Orange County, those 2 districts, are also essentially perfect overlaps, right? Almost fully complete.
Yes. Well, I see the numbers on the chart. Yeah.
And if you now look at your spreadsheet, you'll see you also forgot to include these 2 districts on your spreadsheet, districts 50 and 56.
Yeah, I don't see them listed.
If we can now do a split screen between the Excel sheet and Plaintiff's Exhibit 125. If you look at this, if you look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 125, you'll see that for District 90, if we could zoom in on that, John, that actually is not that high an overlap, right? There actually were some changes there in District 90. Does that look like that?
It says 70.82% match.
Much lower than 100%, right?
Yes.
Okay. And now if we look back at your spreadsheet, and if we look at row 94, you did include District 90 in your spreadsheet, right? If we look at column D.
Yes.
Okay. If we go back now to the right side, John, if you could zoom out on Plaintiff's Exhibit 125. Now look at District 65, which is essentially a perfect match. You see that?
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, you did not include District 65 in your overlap analysis, did you? In your spreadsheet?
No, it's not listed here.
So even within a specific county grouping, you included the district that had a low overlap, but you excluded the district that had a perfect overlap, having the effect of driving down your overlap calculations, right?
No, the analysis is done, or the locking is done county by county, so it wasn't like I chose one district to include and then excluded the other.
I'm just saying as a factual matter, for this specific county grouping, you included in your calculations the district that had a low overlap, and you excluded the one that had a high overlap, right?
According to numbers on Chen's chart, yes.
Okay. If we can now pull up plaintiff's exhibit, keep the spreadsheet, zoom out on the spreadsheet and pull up plaintiff's exhibit 126. If we look at Dr. Chen's chart, you can see that districts 26 and 28 those are the two districts in this grouping that have a low overlap percentage, right? Those are the two districts in this grouping that actually changed a decent amount.
They were less than 90% match,
Right.
according to Chen.
And if we now look at your Excel spreadsheet, we can see that you included these two districts in your overlap calculations, right? In rows 8 and 10.
Yes.
And now let's look at Dr. Chen's sheet for districts 21, 22, and 51. Those all are were fully drawn already, fully complete, right? Perfect overlap nearly.
The one is 100%, the other two are 96%. The one is 100%, and the other two are 96%.
And if we look at your Excel spreadsheet, we'll find that you didn't include those three districts that are perfect overlaps in your Excel spreadsheet.
Correct.
So again, within a specific county grouping, you somehow managed to include the two districts that didn't have a lot of overlap, but you excluded the three that were basically perfect matches, right?
I mean, they're not perfect matches, but, well, two of the three aren't perfect matches, but they're not in the list.
And you agree that those ones that are over 90, I can't even see from here, 97% matches, those are all districts over which the map maker has some discretion, right? So they should have been included in your spreadsheet.
Well, that's why I need to go back and check and see why they weren't excluded.
Well, I can tell you they're all in colors on your chart as to D7, as to which ones you said you were including in your analysis.
Right, and I'm not sure whether it's the map or the spreadsheet that has the mistake, whether they should or should not be included.
Standing here today, you have no basis to assert that somehow those districts should not have been included, right? Given that you colored them on your chart, and I can represent to you those are districts that were redrawn in 2017 over which the map maker had discretion.
Given that representation, yeah, I don't know why they're excluded. I would need to check on that.
Okay, and if we could look at your final, if we could go back to actually the Dr. Chen chart we were just looking at, I believe it's 126. Look at the final district that we haven't talked about yet, District 10, on the top right side. You can see that District 10 is basically a very high match from Dr. Hoffler's draft map to the final plan, including in Wayne County, over which you can see the map maker obviously had some discretion, right?
Again, as accepting your representation that 21 was redrawn from 2011.
And if we go back to your Excel spreadsheet now and zoom in on the first two rows, we can see, again, column D is the district number under the enacted map, and column C is the district number on Dr. Hoffler's draft map. For some reason, you compare District 10 under the enacted map to District 28 under Dr. Hoffler's draft map, right?
Yes, that's.
And unsurprisingly, you found that there was only a 3% match because you were comparing two different districts.
Yes.
And using that 3% number obviously drove down your aggregate statewide overlap percentages that you testified about yesterday, right?
Yes, can you go back to the map on the left?
Sure.
Briefly? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because 10 and 28 do overlap.
Right, but 10 and 10 overlap a whole lot more, right?
Well, it's population-based overlap.
I mean,
And Greene County is excluded because it's locked by the traversal rule.
Dr. Johnson, just look at Wayne County there. It's a perfect match. And that's the majority of the remainder of the district.
But Johnston County also overlaps. I'm sure that's where the numbers are coming from.
Dr. Johnson, are you telling us that you think that District 10 has a higher overlap? The district on the right has a higher overlap with District 28 on the left than it does with District 10 on the left?
That's where the geography means little. I'd have to look and see where the cities are in the dense population. This is the issue.
Okay.
It's come up a number of times. Of population density matters more than territory.
All right, let's put this one aside. All of the other districts we looked at 100% or near 100% match that you forgot to include, including those would have driven up your overlap percentage significantly that you would have calculated between Dr. Hoffler's June map and the final plan, right?
It depends on the degree that they would have changed. It would depend on the population involved.
Dr. Johnson, we just looked at, I don't know, a dozen districts, maybe a little bit less, 10 districts that had a perfect match. You don't think that including those would have significantly changed your calculations?
I would have to rerun them to know how big the change would be. It would not have. It would have been a change in degrees, not in a change in conclusion.
Dr. Johnson, you reported specific numbers. Can we go back to D7? And look at your 36% number and your 74% number.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers are completely wrong, right?
They apparently mismeasure the degree of the change. They don't change the fact that there is significant change between the two maps.
Dr. John,
Whether
sorry.
it's 36% or, if I was up by half, it's still 18%. It's still 1 in 5 residents were moved between the two maps.
Sitting here today, you cannot tell the court that your numbers are correct, right?
I can tell the court that the basic idea is still true, that there is a significant population moved. My exact measurement of that population done in the 3 midnight to 3 a.m. shifts the time I had to get this done, apparently I typed something wrong or coded something wrong, but the degree of, the exact percentage appears to need to be recalculated. The fact that still 1 in 5 or 1 in 3 people were moved, it's still a significant number of people moving from one map to the next.
But I just want to be very clear. Sitting here today, you can see those numbers are wrong.
Those exact numbers, correct.
And
Those exact numbers appear to be wrong. I would need to double check that.
And sitting here today, you have no idea what the correct numbers are.
No, I know there's somewhere between 36 and probably half that.
When you say half that, you're just speculating, right?
No, the 36% is the average change in each of the districts. So if there are, as you say, 10 or 12 districts added to that, those numbers are going to swing that.
Okay. Could we? I'm sorry.
I was swing that in relative to shifting the average amongst all the districts. So yeah, it would make it smaller, but at most it would cut it in half, and then you'd still be at 1 in 5 people moved from the Hoffler plan to the enacted plan.
If we could, I'm going to now hand out Plaintiff's Exhibit 1037. May we approach, Turner?
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, this represents the Excel backup sheet that you produced for your comparison for the common cause maps of Dr. Hoffler's maps. Do you recognize it as such?
Yes. Is it the,
And I'll represent to you, this is the revised version that we received 2 nights ago.
that was going to be my question. Thank you.
Sure. And so the only difference structurally between this exhibit and the prior one is that now column D says H312, and that represents the common cause map, right?
Yes.
And so if I understand, the purpose of this exercise was to show that, well, there's really high overlap between the common cause map and the Dr. Hoffler's draft plan, or not high overlap, but some degree of overlap. That was something you testified about yesterday?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, if we could pull up a split screen between this one and 1021. Dr. Johnson, do you recall that districts 2 and 32 in Granville County were 2 of the districts that you forgot to include or failed to include when you were comparing the enacted map?
There were 2 that we were just looking at. That we were just looking at.
Okay. And let's look now at the common cause one. You did include 2 and 32 there, right?
Yes.
And it so happens to be the case that these are 2 of the districts in the common cause map that had 100% overlap with the draft map, right?
Yes.
So you somehow excluded these perfect match districts when you were analyzing the enacted plan, which had the effect of driving down the overlap percentage you calculated. I'm sorry, you excluded them when you were comparing the enacted map to the Hoffler map, but you somehow included them when you were comparing the common cause map to the Hoffler map, which had the relative effect of making it look like the common cause map was a relatively more, or closer to being similar in overlap percentage as the enacted map was, right?
Well, as you can see in the spreadsheets, there were lots of perfectly matched districts between the Hoffler map and the enacted map that were included in the analysis. So I would reject the implication that I was excluding them because they were exact matches. I would say I did include many districts that were exact matches.
I just want to make sure we're clear, though. You did not include these 2 districts in the enacted map comparison to the Hoffler map, but you did include those exact 2 districts in comparing the common cause map to the enacted map, right?
Yes.
And the effect of that was to make it look like the enacted map, in conjunction with the other districts you forgot to include, was to make it look like the enacted map wasn't that much of an overlap with the Hoffler draft relative to the common cause map, right?
It changed the number reported. It doesn't change the conclusion that there was. It changed the number reported. It doesn't change the conclusion that there was significant change between the 2 maps.
Okay, but empirically it changes the numbers from what you reported, right?
Yes.
Okay. We could pull up Legislative Defendants Exhibit 290. This is your rebuttal report you testified about yesterday, right?
Yes.
And go to page 8, paragraph 23, please. And this is a part of your rebuttal report where you said you read that correctly, a larger percentage of the state's population in the common cause map match their assignments in the Hoffler map than match their assignments in the 2017 adopted map. That's what you wrote originally in your rebuttal report, right?
This is the paragraph that we struck in the errata.
Right. So in the errata you submitted the other night, you now admit that this statement was incorrect. It's not true that the common cause map has a higher overlap with the Hoffler map than the enacted plan does, right?
As we already disclosed, I found a coding error that had generated that percentage, so we struck it.
And in fact, Dr. Johnson, if you hadn't made all of the other mistakes that we just identified, you would have found that the enacted map actually is way, way more similar to the Hoffler map than the Common Cause map is, right? Not even remotely close.
I would disagree. I would say that the conclusion that both of them had significant changes from the Hoffler map remains in place.
But you have no empirical basis to say that right now because you don't know what the correct numbers are.
Well, unless you didn't walk through all the examples, I presume you did, just because it's an average amongst all the districts we're looking at, it would not have shifted it. I mean, I find it hard to imagine it would have shifted even by half, but just being on the conservative side, even if it shifts it from 36 to 18%, which would be an extreme. Oh, even if it shifts it from 36% to 18%, if I was off by half, it's still a significant shift from the adopted map. It's still a significant shift between the Hoffler map and the adopted map.
Dr. Johnson, are you aware that legislative defendants have relied on this original analysis and the statement you made here for representations they've made both to this court previously and to the public?
I haven't read all the briefs.
If we could pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1002, I'm sorry, and we'll hand it out. May we approach, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
If we could look at the bottom of page 2 of this handout. Do you see the quote there from Senator Berger's spokesman?
Your Honor, we object to this. He said that this is a newspaper article. It has nothing to do with the evidence presented before this court. In addition, the witness has no personal knowledge of what a spokesman may have said in an email or not.
Overruled.
Put this on the screen. Do you see?
I'm sorry. This also happens to be hearsay, so we should have objection as well.
Overruled. We're not receiving it for the truth of the matter, sir.
Did you see the statement there from Senator Berger's spokesman where he says, here's what the 35 files show. The Hoffler play maps are more similar to what Common Cause submitted to the federal court in 2017 than the maps enacted by the legislature. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that statement that was made to the public, that's not accurate, right?
Correct. I probably owe Pat Ryan an apology.
And so I just want to, and I'll move on from this in a second, I just want to be clear. Sitting here today, neither the court nor the public nor anyone else can rely on the overlap percentages that you calculated, right? For the enacted plan.
The specific numbers are off, but the conclusion remains true and factual, that there is a significant change. It's just how averages work. If there's 12 missing, then they're not going to overwhelmingly swing when there's the numbers when there's a lot more than 12 in the pool.
Okay. I'll move on. Dr. Johnson, I'd like to now talk, putting these mistakes aside that we just identified for the House plan, I'd like to now talk about your general approach to doing this overlap analysis and how you calculate what you call your similarity index. Can we pull back up, or can we pull up Legislative Defendants Exhibit 290? And if we look at, John, can we actually go to page 3, paragraph 5? And you say here that the purpose of your similarity index is to calculate, quote, how many people were moved from the draft map to the final map. Is that right?
It's to look at whether the size of the population change, whether the scale of the change is significant.
But I'm just trying to understand. You say you're trying to calculate how many people were moved, right?
The exact number is not nearly as important as the scale and whether it would be a significant or change or not a significant change.
You're trying to calculate the percentage of people that were moved. Is that a fair statement?
No, I'm trying to rebut Chen's claim that there was an insignificant number of people changed between the Hoffler map and the adopted map, and so I'm evaluating whether or not that percentage of people is significant. If it's 18 or 36%, both are significant numbers.
Okay, I don't think this will be controversial. You wrote here that the purpose of your calculation was to measure how many people are moved, right?
Are you intentionally misreading, or are you putting your own words into it? I'm looking at the scale of population to evaluate whether or not it's a significant number of people.
Okay.
The exact number is not the key part of this.
I'll hand out now Plaintiff's Exhibit 1025. May we approach her?
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, this is an illustration we came up with just to show how your similarity index is calculated. So I'll just take it piece by piece. Let's say the blue box in the top, that's the district that was labeled District 1 in Dr. Hoffler's June draft map, okay?
Okay.
And it had 100 people. They're equally distributed throughout the whole district, okay?
Sure.
Okay. If we now, John, can you actually just keep it zoomed out? Now let's say in the enacted map, District 1 gets moved over to the east a little bit. So I should have put this on here, but just imagine that there's latitude, longitude coordinates. So District 1 just gets shifted over to the east a little bit. So we lopped off the people who lived on the far left side of the district on the west side, and then we added some people who live on the right side. Still got 100 people, though, who are equally distributed. Okay?
Sure. Yes.
So now the bottom image shows the overlap between the two if you just superimpose geographically the orange one on top of the blue one. And as my colleagues pointed out to me, I should have used a different color other than light blue. That's more of like a mix of orange and blue. But if we look at the overlap here, you'll see that we have the 25 people who were originally in District 1 on the far left in the dark blue, right? They're no longer in District 1, right? Do you see what I'm talking about?
Gotcha.
We have 75 people who were originally in District 1 who are still in District 1 in the final, right?
Yes.
And then we have 25 people who have been added to District 1 who weren't originally in District 1, right?
Yes.
So you would agree with me that of the original District 1, there were 25 people moved out of this, right?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that of the original District 1, there's 75 people still in District 1, right?
Yes.
So the percentage of the original District 1 who are still in District 1 is 75%, right?
Yes.
But when you calculated your similarity index, you didn't use that 75%, right?
Right. That's not how the Cox and Katz similarity index works.
Sure, I'll get to that in a second. Because it's confusing. That's not 75% is not the number you would have calculated for under your index, right?
Right.
You included the 25 people in the denominator. So you included the total people who were in the original District 1 and the new District 1, sort of the total unique people, that's in your denominator. So it's 125 people go in your denominator, right?
Right.
And so your overlap percentage or your index percentage is 60%, right? Not 75%.
Trying to do 75 by 125 in my head, I'm failing. But I'll take your word for it.
Take my
It's
word for
75
it.
by
If I
125.
misdivided 75 by 125, that's my bad.
Sure.
So when you talk, this is why I was focusing on this before. If your goal is to calculate the number and percentage of people were moved out of their district, isn't the correct number here 25%? Because 25% of people were moved out of their district, District 1?
Well, the reason that the similarity index was developed and the reason why it's used is that this is really logical if we only have 2 districts involved. But when you start having pieces of 4 and 5, and it's unclear which district is, to use your example, District 1 versus District 1, often the numbers are completely different. So the similarity index is developed to, yes, it's more complicated, and it gives you an average, not a number you can add up state.
But
But
Dr. Johnson-
that's why the similarity index works that way as opposed to this more straightforward approach that works only when it's really simple.
Dr. Johnson, I've read that Cox article. I'm sorry.
The straightforward approach.
That works in this simpler example.
Dr. Johnson, I'll represent you. I've read that Cox article. Nowhere do they say that this formula was intended to be used to calculate the percentage of people who are moved when you're doing a statewide analysis of districts. You know, how many people were moved out of their district from one draft to another. It just doesn't say that, right?
That's the entire purpose, is to establish the district by district percentages of overlap, and then you average those and you get a statewide average, is what I reported.
But the article doesn't say it was intended to calculate how many people were moved, right? It's just a measure of some measure of percentage overlap for a completely different purpose.
I disagree with that characterization.
So if we look at your example here, so you included the 25 orange people in your denominator, right, for this district? You would have included them in the denominator when you're calculating the overlap percentage?
Yes.
Right. And that has the effect of lowering the overlap percentage, right?
Relative to the other approach that you described, yes.
Those 25 people came out of a different district, right?
They come out of the other district that that the new district comes from. So when looking at District 1, it's getting 75% of the original District 1 population, and it's getting people from the other district. So this approach completely ignores the new people.
Right, but so the people, yes or no, the people who are, the orange 25 people who go into District 1, they came out of a different district, right? Necessarily?
Yes, they were moved in the changes made between the original map and the new map.
So when you, in your statewide analysis, when you look at that other district, you would include those 25 people in the denominator there too, right? You're double counting them.
No, that's why the index percentage is calculated district by district, and then you take the average.
Right, exactly. So let's say we're just calculating the percentage for this District 1, and let's say they were moved out of District 2. You're doing those separately, right?
Yes.
You're including those same 25 people in the denominator for your District 1 calculation and in the denominator for your District 2 calculation, right?
Yes.
So you're double counting them.
No.
They're counted twice?
The indexes are separately calculated for each district.
You would agree with me that if you didn't calculate your similarity index this way, which adds those people to the denominator, you would get a higher overlap percentage, right? The effect of adding them decreases what you calculate to be the overlap from Dr. Hoffler's draft map to the final plan. Sorry.
decreasing figure.
I'll say it again. You would agree with me that just mathematically, the effect of adding those 25 people to the denominator here, the effect of that is to make it seem like there is less overlap between Dr. Hoffler's draft map and the enacted plan, right?
No, it's to accurately follow the similarity index methodology.
We can agree to disagree on that, the methodology of the similarity index. The mathematical effect, just as math division, of including those 25 people is to lower the overlap percentage that you calculate, right?
In this example, yes. It also makes it a usable tool when you have more feeder districts.
Okay. If we could pull back up Plaintiff's Exhibit 1021. I'm sorry, I gave the wrong number. If we could hand out 1026. May we approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, do you recognize this as the backup file you produced for your Senate overlap calculations?
Yes.
And column H here, the overlap percentage, that corresponds to the division formula that we were just looking at, right? Obviously using real districts instead of my squares.
Yes.
Okay. So let's put aside for the second our methodological disagreement about doing the formula this way. If you look at row 58, you see the number highlighted yellow there, 81%.
Yes.
That, and then if we could pull up a split screen with D7. D7, Johnson demonstrative 7. And if we could zoom in on the box on the right side, the top box on the right side, the number. Oh, I'm sorry, it might be D6? It's the 7th one. Okay, and then if we zoom in on that box. So again, that 19% that you calculate a percentage of people moved, it says percent moved, we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay, that 19% corresponds to the 81% you calculate in this Excel chart, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you're saying here 81% of the people in the state were not moved and 19% were moved out of the districts that you say are the discretionary districts?
Yes.
Okay. If we could now focus back on the Excel chart. Dr. Johnson, that 81% number is an average of all of the overlap numbers in column H, right?
Yes.
Is it a straight average or a weighted average by population?
A straight average.
So for instance, if we go to row 6, and we see there that there's a 25% overlap using your methodology, and the district only involves about 20,000 people, give or take, maybe less depending on how you're counting, right? Right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, and compare that to row 23. You see that where it's 100% overlap and the district involves about 184,000 people?
Yes.
You're weighting those equally, even though they have totally different populations.
Yes.
So your statement that your 81% represents the percentage of the total population that was moved or not moved is not accurate, right? Because you're taking a straight average.
Right. It should have been average population moved, I suppose.
And you would concede that if you had done this correctly and taken a weighted average, that would change your calculations, right? The numbers you produced.
Again, it would have been a slight percentage change. It would not have changed the significance of the conclusion that the maps differ significantly.
When you say it would have been a slight percentage change, you have no idea how much it would change it, right? Sitting here today?
I think I'm pretty good at math, but I can't do the math in my head as I sit here.
So that's a yes? You don't know how much it would change?
I don't know precisely.
Okay. So the numbers you produced on D6, those are wrong also, right?
Which one's D6?
If we go back to D6. That 19% number, along with the other numbers, those are incorrect numbers, right?
It should say average percent moved instead of percent moved.
You testified yesterday that those numbers, and it says on the chart, represents the percentage of the population moved. Those numbers do not, in fact, represent that, right?
They represent the average percent moved, not the percent moved. It's
Dr. Johnson, you just conceded a couple minutes ago that you should have used a weighted average instead of a straight average, right?
no,
Didn't say that?
correct.
We'll let the transcript speak for itself. Had you used a weighted average, those numbers would be different, right?
Yes,
And if you had not included in your denominator those extra people who I claim are double counted and you disagree, but had you not used that, those numbers would be completely different too, right?
they'd be completely different if I used a weighted average.
If you had not included in your denominator both people moved into the district and people moved out of the district, right? As a matter of math, those numbers would be different?
They would be different.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, your overlap analysis, as we just discussed, those were included in your June 21st rebuttal report, is that right?
I would need to look at the date, but
Sure.
the rebuttal date report that I filed, yes. I think that was-
You can take a look for yourself. It'll be on the signature page.
Yes,
Okay. And that was a rebuttal of Dr. Chen's rebuttal report, right?
yes.
I'd like to now hand out Plaintiff's Exhibit 1020, which is a copy of Dr. Johnson's deposition transcript. If we could go to page 44, line 22.
Page 44, line 22.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And you can see there, my colleague, Mr. Jones, asked you, have you been asked to do any analysis, any further analysis, responsive to what is in the plaintiff's rebuttal reports? Do you see that question?
Yes.
And do you see that you answered, no, I haven't had a chance to look at them in enough detail for that yet?
Correct.
Okay. And Dr. Johnson, I should have said this deposition was on June 17th. Is that right?
Yes.
So I just want to make sure I'm getting the timing right. Your testimony is that you had not been asked to and had not in fact begun analyzing Dr. Chen's rebuttal report yet on June 17th.
Correct.
And then produced the rebuttal report, a 12-page rebuttal report with lots of backup on June 21st.
There were 3 very long nights in
Okay.
between when we got the rebuttal report obviously I was prepping for my depot and did not look at it in any detail. And then after the depot was asked, could I rebut that? Because I hadn't had a chance to look at it before the depot. And yes, I
Okay.
spent 3 very long nights trying to turn around in the timeline available in this case.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. You started after the deposition, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to now hand out Plaintiff's Exhibit 1027. Sorry, bear with us a moment. Dr. Johnson, I'll represent to you that this is one of the files that you turned over with your backup, with your rebuttal report. Does it look like one of them, the name?
Yes.
Okay. And you can see the first page here has the metadata, and then the second page has the content of what's in this file. Do you see the date modified there? It says June 13th.
Yes.
And if you look at the content, then you can see that this is the underlying data, including the labels we went over, H313, H314.
What pages are going over it?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'll say that again. You can see that the first page has the metadata listing that this date modified was June 13th. And the second page of this handout has the underlying data that went into your overlap analysis, including the labels that you used of H313, H314, and so on, right?
Yes.
So Dr. Johnson, your deposition testimony that on June 17th, you hadn't been asked to look at the Dr. Chen's rebuttal report and that you hadn't started doing it. That wasn't accurate, was it?
It was accurate.
Dr. Johnson, this file is dated June 13th, and it contains the data that you used for analysis, right?
I use this data for a lot of analysis. A lot of my work was involved looking at the different maps and comparing the different maps. So yeah, no, I had maybe various versions of this file throughout all my work that had the different codes in them. This wasn't created just for this rebuttal report.
So you're saying that this file that's dated 4 days before your deposition and a week before you turned in your rebuttal report, that uses the same labels, H314, to refer to the enacted plan. You're saying that that's just a coincidence?
Oh, I used those labels going back to the very first analysis I did originally.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, you didn't analyze Dr. Hoffler's draft maps in your opening report, in your supplemental report, right?
Oh, true, yeah, no, I didn't have
Okay.
his.
Dr. Johnson, if we...
Mr. Jacobs.
If we look at the second page here, the data, it says H313. That refers to Dr. Hoffler's draft map, right?
Yes,
Which you didn't analyze for your opening reports at all.
correct.
But your testimony is that this data file was for something that you used for your opening reports, even though you didn't analyze Dr. Hoffler's draft maps and I believe didn't even have them at the time of your opening reports. Is that right?
I was using files that had the block keys and the district assignments throughout this whole project. Whenever Dr. Hoffler's files became available, it would not surprise me to know if I merged his into that kind of master file.
Dr. Johnson, you're saying that it's a coincidence that you had Dr. Hoffler's draft map coded in the exact same way you used for your rebuttal analysis, with the exact same underlying data that you went on to use for analysis. You had this in a file that you created and modified on June 13th, but you're saying that that's just a coincidence that you ended up using this exact thing for your rebuttal report?
No.
Dr. Johnson, you didn't analyze the 2011 unchanged districts at all in your opening and supplemental reports, right?
No.
Okay. You did include them in your analysis in your rebuttal report, though, of locked. You considered those locked districts, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to now hand out Plaintiff's Exhibit 1028. Dr. Johnson, this is another one of the files that you turned over with your rebuttal report on June 21st. And again, to orient everyone, your deposition was on June 17th. The first page of this, the file itself contains a list of the quote unchanged districts. You can see the title says unchanged districts list. Is that right?
Yes.
If we look at the next page, this is just the metadata from this file. Dr. Johnson, when was this file created and last modified?
Oh, this says June 15th.
And that's 2 days before your deposition.
Yes.
And it says the author is Douglas Johnson. That's you?
Yes.
So you created this file 2 days before your deposition, 6 days before your rebuttal report containing the list of unchanged districts, right?
Yes.
And you used this file for purposes of your overlap analysis, right? It was in the backup you provided for that analysis?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So Dr. Johnson, I'm going to ask you again. It's not true that as of your deposition, you hadn't been asked to look at Dr. Chen's rebuttal report and start preparing this analysis, right?
That's incorrect.
I'm sorry?
That's incorrect.
Your testimony is that you created this file on June 15th for a purpose totally unrelated to using it for rebutting Dr. Chen's rebuttal report. Then just happened to use it for Dr. Chen's rebuttal report, for rebutting Dr. Chen's rebuttal report 6 days later?
No, we had the Chen materials whenever they came available, and we had the Hoffler files whenever they became available. And I was looking at them, getting them in my system, preparing, obviously getting them into the block master file and things like that. I had not been asked to do specific analysis in any form until after my depo. It was just, this is what we do when we get files, is we process them, we get them in the system, and we look at things that may be needed going down the line. But no, my description was entirely accurate, that I had not been asked to do a specific analysis. I'd just been provided the files and was looking at them and thinking about what might be useful down the road. But I had not been asked to do a specific analysis until after my depo.
All right, if we could pull back up your deposition transcript, the same portion we're looking at.
Back to page 44.
Page 44, yeah. Dr. Johnson, again, when you were asked on June 17th, have you been asked to do any analysis, any further analysis responsive to what is in the plaintiff's rebuttal reports? And you said, no, I haven't had a chance to look at them yet in enough detail for that. Did you just misspeak?
No, I think that's other words for exactly what I just said, which is no, I haven't had a chance to look at them in enough detail for that yet. That being analysis responsive to what's in the plaintiff's rebuttal reports.
Okay, I'll move on, Dr. Johnson. Can we look up, pull up plaintiff's legislative defendants exhibit 290? And go to page 10, paragraph 31. And Dr. Johnson, if I could just ask you to read the two sentences you wrote, starting with, so it is entirely possible that.
So it is entirely possible that the formula fields and sort by field settings cited by Dr. Chen in pages 39 through 51 were set up weeks or months prior to the June and August last modified dates cited by Dr. Chen, and their presence simply shows that at some time those fields and views were set up, not that they were set up or used after the state's adoption of criteria for the 2017 redistricting.
So here you were describing the,
Hold on, let me finish.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Here you were describing the files that Dr. Chen analyzed that showed that the districts in the Maptitude file that had a last modified date after the, in August, mid-August 2017, that were sorted from highest to lowest BVAP, and that had, the map themselves had racial data on the screens themselves. That's what you were describing here, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if I understand your statement here and your testimony yesterday, you were asserting that it's possible that that sorting and those maps might have just been in there in old versions that were copied over, and we don't know when Dr. Hoffler did that sorting or put those BVAP numbers on the screen. Is that a fair description of what you wrote?
I think the description I put here is clearer. I'm not sure I followed all of your wording, but I think the idea is similar.
Okay. Fair enough. Can we pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 149? And just to be clear, from Dr. Chen's testimony, this is one of the files that you were just referring to in your rebuttal report that was last modified on August 14th, 2017, that had the draft house districts sorted from highest to lowest BVAP. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And just as an initial matter yesterday, because there was some testimony about what is, what does Maptitude save and what do you see? You're not disputing that this file, this data view window was sorted this way when Dr. Hoffler last closed this file on August 14th, right? We all agree on that?
Correct.
Okay. If we pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 150, and Dr. Johnson, you may recall, this is also one of the files that you were referring to in your rebuttal report, right? It's the same file we just saw, except this is the map window that has the BVAP numbers in gray labels, right? Pursuant to the formula field in the top left. Is that right?
I'm sorry.
You would agree this is the same, Dr. Chen testified and reported that this is from the same file we were just looking at, except now it's the map window that has BVAP numbers listed in the gray labels over the districts, right?
Yes, I didn't check if the two, well, as you say, I don't know if the two files are from the same backup or not.
Okay.
Some of them had the same file name, but I'll accept your representation.
I'll represent to you that Dr. Chen testified that they are.
Okay.
Okay. And this is also one of the files you were describing in your rebuttal report, saying we don't know when the changes were put into place, when these BVAP labels appeared on the screen, right?
Well, I'm not sure this is the same as the previous screen. The formula field being put in here is a formula to label the districts on the map. That's what that
Right.
character in the quotes is a pipe. So
Okay.
it would put them on 2 lines. It's not a label for the data view.
If I suggested that, then I just misspoke.
Okay.
Okay, let's pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 570. And I'll represent to you, Dr. Johnson, that Dr. Chen testified, and this exhibit has been admitted into evidence already, that this is just the properties tab for that exact same file that we've been looking at, the last 2 windows. Will you accept that representation?
Well, it's the properties for the plan, but yes.
Sure. I always get corrected because I plan and file are different.
Sure.
Can we now do a split screen between this and Plaintiff's Exhibit 562, which also has been admitted into evidence already in this case? If we could zoom in on the, maybe just on the right side of each job. Yeah, and the same for the other one. Okay. Dr. Johnson, do these 2 plans have the exact same plan name, NC House J25?
Yes.
And do they have the exact same date created timestamp down to the 2nd, June 25th, 2017, 16:30:43?
Yes.
And they have the exact same lineage in their commons fields?
Yes.
So the only difference between these 2 plans is the last modified date, right? The one on the right was last modified August 7th. The one on the left was last modified August 14th, right?
As far as their properties go,
Sure.
yes.
So this is the same file, right? Same plan. Maybe there's a better way to put it. The one on the right was just backed up on August, or closed on August 7th, 2017. The one on the left was just closed on August 14th, 2017, right?
No, there could be, the map could be entirely redrawn.
The map would be what?
Entirely redrawn.
It didn't mean to suggest otherwise. This is the same file that was just opened and closed at some point on August 7th, and then closed again on August 14th. And changes could have been made in between the 2, right?
So, I guess what are you saying is the same about them then?
It's the same plan that Dr. Hoffler opened, either made changes or didn't make changes, closed on August 7th, opened again at some point in between, and closed on August 14th, right? It's the same icon that he clicked on, or file, whatever is the right word.
It's got the same plan name, but the plan could be redrawn. Based on what you're showing, I have no idea.
I agree the plan could be drawn. I'm just saying it's the same plan that was the same file that was backed up on 2 different dates, right?
It's the same file name, but just the reason I'm confused, like with Word, you can have a Word file that has the same name in 2 different folders. With MapTude, you can have the same thing. You can have 2 plans that have the same name, especially in the case we're looking here where we have all these different backups.
Right.
So just because they have the same name doesn't mean they're the same plan.
But it's the same, right? Same exact date, created date down to the 2nd, right?
Yes.
Okay. If we could pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 344. And zoom in just on the map part. Dr. Johnson, I'll represent to you that this is the map window associated with the August 7th backup that we were just looking at of this file. Do you see there the district labels in the gray boxes? They don't have the BVAP listed, right?
I don't know what those are.
Well, if we just zoom in on them, they're population deviation, right? They're all under 5%.
They're all under 5. They all appear to be under 5%. I don't know what they are.
John, can you zoom back in on that one? The one you were just, or any of them? Do you see District 74 says minus 3.62%?
Yes.
You would agree you can't have a negative BVAP in a district, right?
Oh, true.
So these appear to be population labels. Population deviation statistics, right?
I mean, they could be my Republican Advantage scores. I have no idea what they are.
They're not BVAP numbers. We can agree on that.
Yes.
Okay. So we now know that the same plan that was backed up on August 7th did not have BVAP numbers on the screen. On August 14th, it did have BVAP numbers on the screen, right?
No. You didn't show, I didn't see the one that had them on the
Okay.
map.
Let's go. So this is the one that was saved on August 7th. No BVAP numbers, right? I'll represent to you this is the one that was saved on August 7th. This one has no BVAP numbers, right?
Showing on the district labels, correct?
Sure. Okay, can we pull up 150 again? And do zoom in on the district labels? This is, I'll represent to you, this is the map window for the one that was backed up on August 14th, okay? This one does have BVAP numbers in the district labels, right?
See, this is what's weird, is if the labels are already that way, you wouldn't have the formula fields box showing that's showing. If those labels are already there, you wouldn't pull up the window and then enter in something that's already showing on the screen. Unless whoever's at the top, who's at the top of the screen, the firm that made this screenshot.
I can represent to you, this is just a screenshot that you get when you literally open the file and click, say, screenshot. No changes were made to this window from the way it was saved.
But the screenshot was made by, is it Blake?
Correct. Blake, Mr. Esselstyn, our
Yeah,
consultant
if you zoom back out, please. Let me see. Yeah, you can see at the top, what is it, frontwater.go. Yeah.
Right.
This is the screenshot from his computer, not from Dr. Hoffler's computer.
Sure. So I'll represent to you that Mr. Esselstyn clicked open on the file and just took a screenshot exactly as the file existed.
No, that's not how MapDude works.
Okay.
You can't, just clicking open on the file would not show the data view, it would not show the menus, it would not show any of this. It would not show the formula box. Mr. Edelstein had to open that formula box himself.
Right. I'll represent to you, Mr. Esselstyn did not change the change to make it appear that the BVAP numbers appear in gray labels on the screen. Will you accept my representation?
I mean, I don't have any other choice, do I?
No. So if that is in fact true, you would agree to me that Dr. Hoffler added these BVAP labels at some point between August 7th and August 14th, 2017, right?
You're asking me to follow a logic path, and I just have that formula window being open on the screen just throws off the whole logic path. There's no reason to have that window open.
Okay.
If the label's already there, unless you're creating something for display. A map maker wouldn't open that window unless you're changing labels.
I'll ask you one non-controversial question. I'll move on. You wrote in your report that you don't know when the BVAP numbers in these files first appeared. You could have checked that yourself, right, by looking at prior versions of the map.
Oh, but I didn't have anywhere near the time to be able to go through what would have been required to try to trace that back. And again, it would have only told me which closed session it was added in. It wouldn't have told me when it was actually added.
Okay. I'd like to go back now to your opening report and your test map that you created and the partisanship analysis in the test map.
We're going to go ahead and recess until 5 minutes until 11. Before we get underway, we wanted to go ahead and rule on the one issue relating to the objection and the motion to reconsideration and the proffer that was made, just in case you need to incorporate that into your questioning. We'll make this ruling. So yesterday, we sustained an objection to Doug Johnson demonstrative number 8, which purports to represent some populations relating to House District 59 and Senate District 27, and changes made by the special master. We will accept into evidence 4 lines from that chart. We will accept, I'll give you a moment to get to that. We'll accept into evidence adopted House, the line that says adopted House 59 has a number, a count, and then same line has adopted Senate 27. We accept that line. We accept the line that says added by special master all the way across for both House and Senate, removed by special master all the way across for this House and Senate, and then skipping a line down to special master House 59 total population all the way across for House and Senate. The other portions of that exhibit, the objection is sustained either on the basis of reliability or our own ability to draw conclusions from the data that we've identified.
Your Honor, if I may just clarify, is the first 3 lines of the 5th line?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Skipping total change by special master line.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. All right, very good. You may continue, Mr. Jacobson.
Can I ask one clarification?
Yes, sir.
The 2 bullets at the top,
Uh,
we're not admitting those?
We're not admitting those.
Okay.
We're accepting only the population counts as reported. We're assuming that, or they're represented as being accurate, but we believe that's something that you either in cross-examination or in rebuttal could correct if you believe those numbers are not accurate.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Dr. Johnson, I'd like to move back to your opening 2 reports, the opening report and the supplemental report that had the test map. You testified yesterday, both in direct and in the cross, that the only county grouping for which you sort of analyzed whether within the confines of the county grouping rule, whether the enacted plan is a maximum Republican plan was Mecklenburg in the Senate. Is that right?
Mecklenburg in the Senate and Wake in the House.
Mecklenburg is the only Senate county grouping for which you analyze whether within the confines of the county grouping rule, the enacted plan is the most favorable plan for Republicans possible, right?
Yeah, if you're including,
Favorable plan for Republicans possible.
just to clarify, if you're including the traversal rule within the county groupings, then yes.
Okay.
Within the county.
Within the county groupings.
If we could pull up your report, supplemental report, page 289. Legislative Defendants Exhibit 289. Too many exhibits. And look at page 3, paragraph 7. You wrote, Dr. Johnson, that the goal, you believed that the goal in creating Senate District 41 was to create a, quote, suburban district and to, quote, keep Charlotte united as much as possible, right?
Yes, that's what I observed that the map did.
Okay. And if we just flip very quickly to the next page, you also described Senate District 39 as uniting the southern suburbs, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you talked about this at some length in your testimony yesterday in direct. Is that right?
Yes.
If we go back to the prior page, page 3, and look at your figure here, you, just to clarify as an initial matter, when you say the goal, you have no personal knowledge of what, why Dr. Hoffler or the General Assembly drew this cluster the way it did, right?
Only the criteria that the legislature adopted.
You haven't spoken, you never spoke with Dr. Hoffler about why he drew this cluster the way he did?
Correct.
And you haven't spoken with the members of the legislature about why this district was enacted the way it is, right?
Correct.
It's just your observations.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to first start with your assessment that Senate District 41, what the goal of that was to unite the suburbs and keep Charlotte together as much as possible. Can we do a split screen between this and Plaintiff's Exhibit 285? Plaintiff's Exhibit 285, Dr. Johnson, I'll represent, is just one of the images from our plaintiff's experts, Dr. Cooper's report that shows this cluster with VTD shaded red or blue based on their votes in the 2016 Attorney General race. Will you accept that representation?
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry. I know. Okay. Plaintiff's Exhibit 285. I'm just representing to you that that is a figure that Dr. Cooper testified about. And it just shows this Mecklenburg Senate county grouping shading it red and blue based on the vote shares in the 2016 Attorney General race. Will you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. And looking at your figure again from your supplemental report, the pink area represents the city of Charlotte, the contours of the city of Charlotte. Is that right?
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, if you just look at Senate District 41, how it starts in the north and stretches all the way down to the very bottom tip that it grabs, that's the city of Charlotte, right? Not the suburbs?
The very bottom tip of District 41?
Correct.
Well, it's a mix of, you can see the little white part that's suburb and the pink that's city. But yes, by the time it gets down, really even above that point, where it picks up the pink above that, it kind of runs out of suburbs to put in. So it just stays on that west edge of the city.
So it grabs portions of the city of Charlotte, right, in the southern tip?
It grabs VTDs that are mixed, city and suburban.
And if we look at Dr. Cooper's chart, you could see that those portions of the city of Charlotte that it grabs are red. They're Republican-leaning VTDs, right?
Two of them, a lot of them are blue.
There are some red Republican VTDs that this district grabs in the southern portion, correct?
Yes, two.
So, Dr. Johnson, this district wasn't created to, quote, unite the suburbs, was it? It was stretched this way to grab those Republican VTDs at the very bottom, right?
We just discussed that I don't know Dr. Hoffler or the legislature's motives. I was observing that one thing it does is keep the suburban area separate from the city as much as possible.
Okay, let's look at that. Look at the area between District 38 and District 41 on your map with the pink. Do you see that white space right there on the border between the two?
I'm not sure.
John, can you highlight? No. Sort of in the middle of District 38, the middle left. You see the big white space between the pink? No. The big white space. There we go. You see that?
Yes.
Those are suburbs of the city of Charlotte, right?
They're not in the incorporated area. Yeah.
Suburbs?
I don't know if when you're surrounded like that, I don't know if you'd characterize them as suburbs or not. But
For purposes of
they're
your
not, like I
supplement.
said, they're not in the city.
Okay. So, Dr. Johnson, isn't it true that in creating this district, the legislature avoided suburbs of the city of Charlotte and didn't put them in SD41, and instead had the district wrap around to, in fact, grab portions of the actual city of Charlotte?
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, as we've discussed and as I discussed at length, they're moving, other than the one split VTD, which I understand is the legislator's house, they're moving whole VTDs And so when they move around the edge on the left, they're getting whole VTDs. And to get whole VTDs in the area you're talking about, they'd be taking huge chunks of the city as opposed to just the farthest southwestern edges of the city.
Let's look at the other district in this grouping that you described as a suburban district, SD39. We've heard some testimony in this case about the pizza slice, that sort of triangle that you see in the northwest portion of SD39. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's all Charlotte, right? City of Charlotte?
Yes.
In fact, SD39 cuts into the heart of the city of Charlotte, right?
Well, as we discussed, I'm not an expert on what's the heart of the city of Charlotte, but it does cut into close to the geographic center of the city.
And in fact, if we look at the right side of SD40, where it borders SD39, see all that white space? The eastern part of SD40, you see that?
Yes.
Those are suburbs of Charlotte, right?
Again, the white part is not in the incorporated part of the city.
And if we look at Dr. Cooper's map, you could see that those suburbs are very blue, right? Democratic leaning?
Well, no, this is the challenge of looking at VTD data where the part of the VTD is in the city and part of it's out. Where those VTDs have pieces of the city and pieces of the suburb, we don't know the breakdown of the city voters in that VTD versus the non-city voters in that VTD.
Dr. Johnson, isn't it true that in creating SD39, it's not created to unite the, quote, suburbs of Charlotte? And if it were, it would have included those suburban areas, right?
Well, as you know, I've described SD39 as a combination suburban and city district. I didn't describe it as an effort to unite the suburban areas like I did 41. I didn't describe it as an effort to unite the suburban areas the way I did District 41.
Can we go back to Dr. Johnson's report, supplemental report, page 4? Read that first sentence. Dr. Johnson, isn't it true that you wrote in your report that SD39, quote, unites the southern suburbs?
Yes. I say yes, it unites the VTDs that are out of the city. Because the VTDs we're looking at are split city and non-city.
All right.
Sorry, how much did you get?
There's split cities and then not split cities.
Oh, VTDs, split VTDs.
Okay. If we could pull up Legislative Defendants Exhibit 287. And go to, this is your opening report, and go to page 16. Dr. Johnson, the right side of this, that's your Republican test map, which you describe as the even more pro-Republican version of Mecklenburg County in the Senate, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Johnson, in creating this Republican test map, did you check whether your test map paired the two Republican incumbents who were in place in 2017?
No, I was not limiting myself with trying to keep the legislators in separate seats.
Can we pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 336 and create a split screen? 336. And zoom in, if we can, as much as possible to the... It's going to be a little bit hard to see. This is Dr. Hoffler's file for this Senate County grouping. If we can zoom in on the pizza slice, do you see the red dot there? See that?
Right below where it says 2.293?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll represent to you that that represents the location of one of the Republican incumbents. And if we go up to SD 3041 in this same exhibit on the northern port of this cluster, you can see that there's another red dot, which is the other Republican incumbent at the time. See that?
Yes.
And if we look now again back at your exhibit, your pro-Republican test map, you can see that your test map actually pairs the two Republican incumbents, right?
Yes, this reinforces the point that by keeping the incumbents in separate seats, they actually limited the extent to which they could increase their Republican advantage in the districts themselves.
So Dr. Johnson, you don't know whether the enacted Senate version of Mecklenburg County is the most favorable version of that county that could have been drawn that didn't pair the two Republican incumbents, right?
I have not evaluated that.
Okay. Finally, I'll just move to this exhibit, the D8, the one that was moved in yesterday. Oh wait, here it is. Can you pull up D8? Dr. Johnson, I just want to clarify this, and again, for the record, we haven't confirmed all these numbers, but I'll ask you questions on the assumption that these numbers are correct. Dr. Johnson, how many people currently live in HD 59?
79. That'd be the special masters.
Right.
HD 59. So 79,457.
And of the current people who live in HD 59, how many people were added there by the special master?
6,537.
So of the current composition of HD 59, only 8% was added by the special master, and 92% is as drawn by the General Assembly, right?
Yeah.
So when you wrote here that the special master moved 17% of the population of HD 59, that's totally incorrect, right?
No, that's a reference to the HD 59 that the special master was given, and then he moved 9% of it out, and he added 8% of it in. So 17% of the population either went in or out of that
But
district.
we agree that of the current HD 59 as it exists in the real world today, 92% of that was drawn by the General Assembly, right?
92% of the people in the current district were drawn into that same district by the General Assembly.
Okay, and the same, I won't do the numbers again, but the same is true for the SD 27, right?
Be the inverse of 23, so it'd be, what is that, 77% of the current population of SD 27 were also in the legislature's SD 27.
And Dr. Johnson, you don't dispute Dr. Chen's testimony that his simulations don't move any of the portions of either of these two districts that were drawn by the special master, right? You haven't offered anything to dispute that?
Meaning the district as it was drawn, the people who were in the district as it was drawn by the special master stay there. They're not moved by Dr. Chen.
I have no more questions. Your Honor, given the testimony we've seen today, we're going to move to strike all of Dr. Johnson's testimony from yesterday and about the overlap analysis and the overlap percentages, and the portions of the rebuttal report that correspond to that for three reasons. One is simply relevance. Dr. Johnson has admitted today that the numbers that are reported and that he testified to are just wrong. They're not correct. And so obviously incorrect numbers are not relevant. Even if they are relevant, the risk of unfair prejudice far outweighs it because we're dealing with speculation, and if it's in the record, we're going to then be dealing with the legislative defendants citing inferences and speculation based on numbers that are inaccurate. And then finally, and I won't belabor the point, but I think the record on the deposition speaks for itself with the backup files that predated that deposition. And we believe we were deprived of a chance to depose Dr. Johnson about this analysis, which he clearly had started conducting before the deposition. So on those bases, we've moved to strike those portions.
I'm sure we'll need to take that under advisement, but I think what we ought to do is hear any redirect, and then we will hear whether there needs to be further discussion about that motion, but I think that would be the appropriate time to be heard on that. But so for the moment, we'll just hold that in abeyance and allow for, let me ask first whether there is any cross-examination by the intervening defendants, by the state. All right, and now we turn to redirect Mr. Lewis.
Dr. Johnson, I just have a few questions for you. First, I'd like to refer you back to I believe it was plaintiff's 1053, and I may need plaintiff to pull it up since we didn't get a copy, but the demonstrative regarding your similarity index. Oh, wrong one.
You mean his backup file?
No, your little demonstrative on the similarity. Is it 1058?
10, I think it's 1025.
1025. Let's try that.
Do you need a copy?
No, I can pull up the screen. All right. So, Dr. Johnson, would you describe for the court how the similarity index works?
Sure. It's designed to deal with measuring the population who are in the same district in both maps, especially in situations where the district numbers may not correlate. So in this one, simple, it's District 1 versus District 1, but we might have District 1 versus Districts 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, it's not as simple as taking District 1 and District 1. And so it looks at the total population of both of the, or of all the feeder districts, and looks at the percentage of the new district, which comes from the largest feeder district. So it, instead of relying on numbering, because numbers get switched all the time, it treats as the parent district the one that has the largest overlap, and then looks at what percentage of the new district came from all of the, what percentage of the overlap between the parent and the child district, as they call it, is relative to all the potential parent population.
So returning to the example on the screen where we have the blue and the orange, and then they overlap. How would you calculate the similarity index for those two, for that example?
You would take the 75 people that come from, well, it's a little hard here because we don't have one that's the parent seat, but I guess we just assume one is the parent, given they're both the equal numbers. You take 75 and say that it's what percentage of the 125 there is 75. So you get your 60% calculation.
And that similarity index is based on, is accepted in the political science literature, correct?
Yes, it's accepted as a way to deal with the fact that maps from different sources often have very different numbers, and it's often not accurate to just pair District 1 with District 1 and District 2 with District 2. You have to figure out what are the parent districts.
Okay. And if you return to, again, returning to this example, if, as I understand it, if 75 out of 100 people from blue get added to 75 people out of orange to create, the 100-person district, why is the answer not that the two districts are 75% the same?
Because the index is trying to reflect that it's a merger of the two districts. We're looking for the degree of change and the whether or not there's a significant difference between the parent map and the, as the index calls it, the child map. And so we're looking for, is there a significant difference? And you have to look at all the pieces for that.
So you have to really focus on both the population added and the population removed, is that correct?
Yes, both of those moves will have an obvious impact on the communities that are in the district and on the total population and makeup of the district in the end.
Now, Dr. Johnson, I know we've heard some testimony about some calculation issues with certain of the house clusters in your house map, correct?
Yes.
All right. Do you have any reason to believe that I believe we heard about 10, I think it was 10 out of 120 districts, I think was the total that plaintiffs were raising. Is that correct?
Sounds about right.
Objection, Your Honor. That's just mischaracterizes the cross and it's calling for speculation.
Sustained this before. Ask him a question and not leave his question.
Okay. Do you recall how many House districts were reviewed with you by plaintiff's counsel on cross-examination?
I think it was about 10, 9 or 10.
And so what we're talking, and there are 120 districts in the House, is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor. This is misleading. The witness's own chart shows that it was way fewer than 120 districts that are subject to change. It was like, I don't know, 25, 30 maybe. And it's a leading question.
Sustained this before.
Right. How many districts, how many House districts are there in North Carolina State Representatives, House of Representatives?
120.
So even if we assume that the 10 districts were omitted from your analysis, can you do you have an opinion as to the magnitude of error that would introduce into your ultimate calculation?
Objection, Your Honor. It just calls for speculation.
Sustained.
We have no further redirect.
All right, very well. Thank you, sir. You may step down.
And I need to move exhibits in, Your Honors, and I'd like an opportunity to address the motion to strike.
Yes.
I suppose I should probably address the motion to strike first. A few points, Your Honors. If there are some calculation errors that went into the House plan that council discussed, that goes to weight. It doesn't require the wholesale striking of testimony. Second, with respect to Dr. Johnson's Senate analysis, plaintiff's counsel did not identify to my knowledge, any Senate clusters that could have been altered that were not considered within the scope of Dr. Johnson's report or his analysis in this case. To the extent that plaintiff's counsel quarrels with the use of an unweighted average versus a weighted average, again, that goes at most to weight. I think it's apparent. I mean, we can argue it without the witness, but the point is, I think it's even apparent from Dr. Chen's own report that many of these districts were substantially changed. And that's even apparent from Dr. Chen's analysis. There's been no testimony to undermine, to my knowledge, the calculations using Dr. Chen's methodology. I believe that the cross-examination focused on the similarity index analysis. To that point, I would note that Dr. Johnson's calculations using the Chen numbers matched Dr. Chen's. He reported 95% similarity. Besides that, Your Honor, I think the counsel made the argument that, based on these files or whatever, that somehow this analysis occurred, that this report was generated prior to, I guess, his deposition. I'm not really sure exactly where that comes out. Our point would simply be, regarding that topic, the argument of prejudice was that they argued Dr. Johnson could not have been deposed regarding the rebuttal expert report. In fact, that report was attached to a filing with the court as an exhibit on June 21st, 2019. They had a month. They could have asked the court to allow a second deposition if they had deemed it appropriate to do so. They didn't. I think Dr. Johnson has testified as he has. If they want to claim that he did some kind of analysis with a file prior to the deposition, again, they could have raised this issue. They could have asked for a second deposition. And so on that basis, we do not believe it's appropriate to exclude his testimony or strike any portion of his testimony. The court can assign whatever weight it deems appropriate.
May I very briefly?
Yes, sir.
I'll be brief. With respect to the house numbers and the statement that it goes to weight, incorrect numbers can't possibly go to weight. They're just wrong. And it's going to lead to significant prejudice and confusion. Imagine, just in all candor, briefing not only to this court, but for the appellate courts, there's incorrect numbers in the record. There might be statements and inferences made based on those numbers, and we're going to be spending appellate briefing explaining that there was admissions that it was wrong, and it'll lead to all sorts of confusion and prejudice. The witness on the stand today personally said that he could not attest to the reliability of any of those numbers. So at a bare minimum, all of the analysis based on the House should be stricken. With respect to the Senate, the witness said on the stand that for what he was purporting to report, which is the percent of the population moved across the state, that he conceded that it would have been appropriate to use a weighted average instead of a straight average. That was his concession. Given that, his numbers, his testimony in his direct is just incorrect. Again, the numbers are wrong. And then finally, with respect to the deposition, again, I don't want to belabor it, but Mr. Jones was there deposing him. Had he disclosed that he had started this analysis, we certainly would have asked a lot of questions about it. We didn't have time to take a second deposition, a couple weeks before trial.
I think what we'll do is take a few moments to confer, and then we will, if we're able to, reach a ruling on this matter, and then we'll proceed with further witnesses.
Superior Court.
All right, we've had an opportunity to confer on the motion to strike portions of testimony of the expert, Douglas Johnson. We are allowing the motion to strike those portions of the expert analysis that relates to the similarity between Dr. Hoffler's maps, or those derived from files that were from Dr. Hoffler's maps, and any comparison between those and the enacted map, between those and the common cause map, and between those and the Covington map. We're doing that under Rule 702. An expert in North Carolina is required to be qualified and base their decision based on sufficient facts and data. His opinions must be the product of reliable methods or principles, and the expert must apply those principles and methods reliably to the facts of this case. We find that with respect to both the House and Senate maps, the application of principles used by Dr. Johnson were not reliable, or in the alternative, he did not apply principles reliably to the evidence in this case. And so therefore we would note that the expert admitted errors both with respect to the similarity analysis that he conducted for the House as well as for the Senate. We find that the failure to use a weighted average is significant with respect to his opinions relating to the Senate maps as well, that he admitted those omissions. So therefore, under Rule 702, we would find that that evidence should be stricken. Also under Rule 403, in weighing the probative value of what remains with respect to a similarity analysis, we would find that that would its probative value is significantly outweighed by the tendency to confuse, and therefore, on that basis, we would strike testimony relating to similarity. In trying to be more specific as to testimony that is being stricken, if we look at the rebuttal report, particularly, and that is Exhibit 290, Legislative Defendant 290, particularly on page 3, there under paragraphs 4, 5, 6, and 7, there are 4 summary opinions given. We believe that this ruling would relate to paragraph 5. And then moving on into the body of the report, we find that it would relate to paragraphs 12 through 26. So those would be the paragraphs we believe would be specifically implicated. There may be others that are tangentially related, but I think that gives sufficient guidance for the scope of our ruling. And of course, it relates to the testimony that was received yesterday and today from the witness. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this point, I think we have to move his exhibits in.
Yes, sir.
I will do so, and I will identify separately the exhibits that are impacted by Your Honor's ruling. We will offer those for the purpose of preserving the record, but we understand that they'll be obviously impacted. So first, excluding the ones relating to the similarity index, we would move into evidence legislative defendants trial exhibits 288, 287, 289, 72, 73, 76, 74, 75, 77, 78, 85, 86, 87, 88, 81, 82, 79, 80, 161, and we would further move demonstratives Johnson 1, Johnson 2, Johnson 3, Johnson 4, Johnson 5, and Johnson 8, the portions that this court has allowed. We'll represent to the court that none of those exhibits implicate the rebuttal report or the similarity index results. The second batch that we're going to move, the rebuttal report, Exhibit 290. We understand that portions the court has ordered stricken, but not the report in its entirety. Exhibit 301 was the errata, which as it relates to the similarity would be impacted by the court's ruling. Legislative Defendants Exhibit 89 and 90, and demonstrative Johnson 6 and Johnson 7.
Are plaintiffs prepared to respond to those exhibits at this time?
Not at this time, Your Honor. I'll just say that.
All right, so we'll do what we've done in the past. We'll move on to other evidence, and then at some appropriate time, we'll hear any objections, and then we'll make rulings on the admissibility of those exhibits. Very good. Is there further evidence for the defendants?
Your Honor, the legislative defense was all Senator Gary Brown.
If you'll please remain standing, place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Mr. Strutt?
Thank you, Your Honor. Senator Brown, could you state your name for the record, please?
Harry Coolidge Brown.
And Senator Brown, are you currently a member of the legislature?
I am.
And what district and which body are you?
I represent Senate District 6, which is Jones and Onslow County.
All right. And how long have you been in the legislature?
This is my 15th year or 8th term
All right. And what year were you first elected?
in 2004.
All right. And was 2004 the first time you'd run for the legislature?
No, sir, I ran in 2002. I ran for a House seat. I actually ran as a Democrat for that House seat. I lost a primary by 60 votes in that particular seat.
All right. And so did you switch to the Republican Party after that loss?
I did, and the reason I did is the party in Onslow County, where the district was at, supported my opponent, and I couldn't even get my materials out through the party. And it was pretty frustrating for me, as you can imagine, that the party itself picked a side, so that's when I changed parties.
All right. So then you were elected to the Senate as a Republican in 2004, is that right?
I was.
How would you describe what counties made up your Senate district at that time?
It was Jones and Onslow County then.
It still is today?
And still is today.
How would you describe the political dynamics in that district when you were first elected in 2004?
I knew it would be a tough race because my opponent, the incumbent, owned a license plate agency in Jacksonville. His wife worked for Governor Easley in the Eastern office at that time. But I knew that district well because I grew up in Jones County. I went to school in Jones County. But then all my adult life, I had worked in Onslow County. So I had been very active in the community. I was chairman of our chamber and president of our Rotary Club. I served on military affairs for over 20 years. I even chaired the Governmental Affairs Committee of the chamber. I was president of the North Carolina Auto Dealers Association. So I was very active in the community, and I knew the two counties as well as any because it was the only two counties I had ever lived in. And I just felt like it was a district that I had a chance to win in.
All right. What was
the makeup of the district was tough because at that point there were probably 5,000 to 6,000 more Democrats registered in Onslow County and close to 4,000 more registered Democrats in Jones County. So I knew it would be a tough race. And also in the primary, I had a previous senator who had served run against me in a primary. So I had a very difficult primary as well. So I knew it would be a tough race, but we worked hard. We won that race.
All right. Was that a district that you assumed would be hard to win for a Republican back then?
At that point it was, mainly because of my opponent and because of the makeup of the district.
All right. So you won that election in 2004. Did you then run for re-election after that?
I did. I ran in 2006. I had an opponent as well in that election. Of course, I worked just as hard in that one as I did my first one, and I won that race pretty handily.
When you say pretty handily, what?
About 65-35.
All right. Did you run for re-election after that, after 06?
I did. For the next 10 years, I ran unopposed. I didn't have anyone run against me. I did have someone run against me in this last election, and I was able to win that race as well in that 65-35 range.
All right. So you ran unopposed as a Republican in Jones and Onslow County District in 2008. Is that right?
I did.
And do you know which party controlled the legislature that drew the maps that you were running under?
Well, for the first, in 04, 06, 08, and 10, those first 4 years, the Democrats controlled the legislature, and then the Republicans won it after that.
And so you ran unopposed. You also ran unopposed in 2010?
I did.
Okay. What's your current position in the Senate?
I'm the majority leader in the Senate and the chief budget writer in the Senate.
All right. As the majority leader, do you participate in recruiting candidates for state Senate districts?
I do.
And do you provide assistance and advice to Republican candidates running for state Senate?
I do.
Are you familiar with the state Senate elections of Republicans elected to the state Senate since you've been the majority leader?
Pretty much, yes.
All right, let's just talk about a few of those. Are you familiar with Senate District 13?
I am. That's Senator Britt's district, which I think is Columbus and Robeson County.
All right, when was Senator Britt first elected?
2016.
All right, were you surprised that he was elected to that district?
We were all surprised, to be quite honest, because that is a district that probably has the fewest Republicans in it than any district in the state.
All right, had you ever been aware of a Republican being elected from that area to the state Senate?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Did Senator Britt in 2016 have a Democratic incumbent that he was opposing?
He did. Senator Smith ran against him. She was an educator and had been in the Senate a couple of terms.
And did you follow that election closely?
I did.
What were the factors that helped Senator Britt win that election?
Well, first of all,
Objection, Your Honor. I don't believe he laid any foundation for that.
Well, he said that he, in his position as a majority leader, he recruits candidates, he assists candidates, he advises them. He followed this election closely. He certainly has a. Thank you, Your Honor.
Senator Britt was a really good candidate. We recruited Senator Britt was a really good candidate. We recruited him. Senator Britt is an attorney in Lumberton. He is in the National Guard, very active there. He's also very active in his community. We knew how much he had done in his community, and we just felt like he was well known in that particular district, and we knew he would work hard. So that's why we recruited him to run, and fortunately for us, he decided to do so.
All right. Did the Republican Senate caucus put any money into that race?
Not at first.
Why is that?
Because we weren't sure a Republican could win that district because it's so heavily Democratic.
All right. And did you eventually put some money in?
We did. We looked at some polling late, and we saw Senator Britt had done a good job of raising money and was working hard in that district. And we felt like if we helped him a little bit, that he had a chance of winning that district.
And he did win in 2016?
He did win.
And was it close?
He won by a bigger margin than we thought. If I remember correct, I think it was like 55-45.
All right. And did Senator Britt run for re-election this past time in 2018?
He did.
And what was the outcome of that election?
He won that race pretty handily, I think in the 70-30 range.
Okay. Were you surprised that he was able to increase the margin like that in that district?
We were surprised by the margin. We weren't maybe as surprised that he won again because of just how hard he worked in the Senate. He is known in the Senate as introducing more bills for his district than probably any senator in the history of the state. And he just worked really hard in his district.
All right. Hypothetically, if Senator Britt weren't running again, and I'm not saying that he's not, I'm not asking you to say whether he's not. Hypothetically, if he weren't running again, would you be worried about winning that district?
That would be a tough district for any other Republican.
All right. Why is that?
Just the makeup of the district. There's so few Republicans in that district.
All right. Let's take a look at Legislative Defendants Exhibit 2. And Senator Brown, I think this is going to pop up. It may be even easier to look at the big screen. Senator Brown, I'll just represent to you, this is simply the Senate election districts that you and Senator Britt and others ran under in 2018. Does that appear to be what it is?
Yes.
Where's, just to orient the court, where's Senator Britt's district?
It's in the southeastern part of the state. It's District 13, which is Robinson and Columbus County.
All right. Do you know why the district is consists of whole counties of Robinson and Columbus?
The makeup of the districts is really controlled by the whole county provision in particular. I think if you look at this map, I think I'm right, 92 counties are whole in the Senate districts. So that rule really eliminates on many ways you can draw districts. So Columbus and Robinson County happened to be a pod that worked under that formula.
All right. You recall when the legislature redrew the districts in 2017, right?
Yes.
Again, hypothetically speaking, if the legislature, if your colleagues had wanted to help Senator Britt in some way, make a better district for him, and didn't have to follow the whole county rule, could you see any scenarios where they could have done that?
Sure. Brunswick County is a Republican county. I think most people would admit. I think you could have possibly split Robinson County and added part of Brunswick County to Columbus and a piece of Robinson County and made that district probably more Republican if that's what you wanted to do.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about a different district, and we can take that map down. Let's talk about Senate District 18. Who's the senator from that district?
That's John Alexander. That's a Wake and Franklin County district.
All right. When was he first elected, to your knowledge?
I think it was 2014.
And was he reelected this past election, 2018?
He was in a close race, yes.
All right. And did you follow that race closely?
I did. I've known John Alexander a long time. He's a heavy-duty truck dealer in Raleigh. I'm a member of the North Carolina Auto Dealers Association. Heavy truck dealers are also a member of that association. So I've known John Alexander for many, many years.
All right. What were the factors that you saw helped him get reelected this past time?
Senator Alexander is another one of those that's really active in his community. The YMCA in Raleigh is named after his family. He has been on many, many boards in Wake County and has been active in that community for pretty much all his life, and his family as well. So he was a really good candidate for us just because of who he was in Wake County.
All right. Let's move on to another topic. I want to ask you some questions, Senator Brown, about how you represent your constituents. All right. Do you and your office perform constituent services?
Pretty much every day, yes.
All right. Do you or your office ask which political party a constituent's with before you'll help them?
I don't think any senator does that. When you're elected to a Senate seat, you represent your whole district.
All right.
You try to help anybody in that district any way you can help them.
All right. Give the court a flavor of what kind of services you perform for constituents.
I think a lot of people think when you're in the Senate, you introduce and try to pass laws, but we really spend more time in constituent work than we do probably passing laws. There are very few days that I don't get a call because I'm in a military district on VA issues. I may get calls on social services issues. Someone trying to figure out how to get disability, or someone trying to get some help through social services. It could be a road issue. There's just, you just can't think of any that we probably hadn't had over 15 years that someone has called and just needs help. And in most cases, they just don't know who to reach out to. And they maybe get referred to me, or just look on who may be their senator, and they give us a call, and we try to help them, or at least get them in front of the right people that can help them, in those cases.
Do you have staff that help you with that?
I do.
All right, and do you do some of it yourself personally?
I do quite a bit of it myself.
All right, let's switch gears again. In your experience in the legislature, is every issue strictly partisan?
Very few issues are partisan, to be quite honest. To introduce a bill and get a bill passed in the legislature is a tough process. Because you introduce a bill, it goes to a rules chair who will assign it to a committee. Then you have to convince the chairman of that committee to hear your bill. Then you have to present your bill in committee. And in most cases, those bills get beat up pretty hard in committee, and that's where most of your amendments will take place, and a lot of debate. Then it'll get to the floor. It could be amended again on the floor. And then hopefully you've got enough of support to get it out of the Senate. Then it'll go over to the House. It'll go to the House Rules Chair. Then he has to decide if he likes it well enough to give it to a committee. So then you've got to work the committee chair that the bill goes to hopefully get the bill heard on the House side. Then you go and present your bill in the House. The House members may like part of the bill, may not like any of the bill, may like enough of it that they want to amend some other pieces of it. So you go through amendments on that side, and then it may have to go to another committee. A lot of bills go through 2 or 3 committees on both the Senate and the House side. So you'll have to go present it in a different committee, and it could get amended again in that particular committee. Then hopefully, after all the work in the committees, it'll get to the House floor. Obviously, it's a different bill than it was that passed the Senate. So hopefully you've got enough support after all the amendments that you can get it passed on the House floor. Then it comes back over to the Senate for concurrence. Most of the time, you don't like all the changes that were made in the House, so you vote not to concur to see if you can go to conference. Then you've got to try to work out all those differences in order to get the bill passed again on the Senate side and the House side. And then you got to have a governor willing to sign the bill into law. So out of a couple thousand bills each year, only about 300 of those ever get passed. And most of those are local bills that have some debate, but not a lot of debate because they are just local bills. Statewide bills, it's a real chore to get those bills through the process and get them passed into law, as you can imagine.
And does it often, is it often the case that once it's finally gotten through that process, that it becomes more of a compromise between senators of both parties as opposed to party line? Definitely so.
There's amendments coming from any member, the Senate or House for that matter, to amend your bill. And those amendments are voted on based on their merit.
And I mean, you're the majority leader, right?
I am.
Does that mean you get to have every one of your bills passed the way you want them?
No, I'm in a military town, and I think a lot of people maybe have read in the news that I introduced a bill that has a moratorium on wind turbines built near military bases. I think it's an important bill to my community, and I think Eastern North Carolina to protect the bases in the state. I had to do a lot of work to get it out of the Senate. It got amended several times in the Senate. Now it's gotten over to the House, and to be quite honest with you, the bill is going to die in the House. I've worked it as hard as I could possibly work it this year, but I can't get that bill done just because I just don't have the support on the House side to get that bill passed.
So, well, on the flip side, can you tell the court about any issues you've worked on in the last few years that were significant or important but bipartisan?
Quite a few. I spent a lot of time working on the broadband issue. I was one of the drafters for the GREAT Act that created funding to expand broadband across the state. I actually got $10 million out of the Senate to fund it the first year. The House didn't put any of those dollars in, but I was able to get it in the budget and get $10 million to go to expand broadband across the state. But as that bill was being heard in committees, it was bipartisan support because it really will help the rural parts of the state, and there's no party in the rural parts of the state. As you can imagine, I mean, I have two counties. One's a fairly wealthy county. One is a rural poor county with Jones County, where I grew up. And I understand the difference between a rural county and a county that's doing better. So I think we've got to do more to help some of these rural counties. I also ran a bill to change how sales tax is allocated. Because back when Medicaid when counties were relieved of the Medicaid burden that they had in '07, the way sales tax was allocated got changed as well during that debate. It used to be that it used to be 50% of sales tax was point of sale, 50% was allocated based on population. During that debate to get the counties out of Medicaid, it changed to where 75% now is point of sale or stays in the county where something's bought, and 25% is based on population. That hurt about 80 rural counties. I ran a bill that would help some of those rural counties, and I had bipartisan support on both Senate and the House to get something done in that matter. We ended up creating about $100 million out of sales tax that would go to some of these poor rural counties. I don't think it's enough. I'm working on another bill to try to change that allocation even more, because most of these counties haven't built schools in 30, 40 years, or can't keep their courthouses up. They can't pay teacher supplements because they don't have a revenue source in order to do that like a wealthy county has. And so I've taken on that challenge to try to find a way to help some of these poor counties. And again, I think that's a bipartisan issue because it touches a lot of areas of the state that are struggling the most, in my opinion. And I think the state's got to find a way to help these counties.
All right. And are you familiar with the voting statistics that the General Assembly maintains on its website?
I am. On our site, you can go to the Senate and you can pull up a member and you can see how we vote on every single bill, any member. And you can see also how the body as a whole voted on any bill. So you can see those percentages.
And can you see on there how often each senator votes with the majority? There's statistics about that?
You can, yes.
And have you looked at those statistics recently?
I have. We look at them to see, who we might could get support on certain bills for. And I think the worst case scenario, if I remember correctly, is about 81 or 2% of the time, this is the worst case scenario, that individual has voted for the bills that passed the Senate.
So another way of saying it is that the senator who votes with the majority the least still votes with the majority about 80% of the time?
I think that if I remember that stat right, it's about 82% of the time.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Brown. That's all I have for now, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senator Brown.
Hi.
I'm Steve Epstein, and I represent the plaintiffs in this case. One of the things that you said, and we're just in fact talking with Mr. Strack about, is that very few issues in the legislature are very partisan, correct?
No, I didn't say that. There are some partisan issues. I said most of those issues are not partisan, yes.
What's the most significant issue the General Assembly deals with every 2 years?
The budget.
Okay. How large has our state budget gotten to now?
This year's budget would be about $24.9 billion.
Okay. And what gets funded in the state budget and at what levels is a highly partisan issue, isn't it?
Some areas of the budget are partisan. Most of the areas in the budget are bipartisan. In this year's budget, we had 4 Democrats vote for our budget. So in most cases, 90% of the budget is bipartisan. It's the 10% that someone may not agree with that creates the problem.
And in fact, our fiscal year begins July 1st, is that right?
That is correct.
And the idea is for the legislature to agree upon and get the governor to sign a budget before July 1st, or at least by July 1st, right?
That is correct.
And today is July 25th, right?
That's correct.
Do we have a budget in the state of North Carolina today?
We do not. The governor has vetoed our budget really on one issue. He has made it clear he wants Medicaid expansion. When we took over, when Republicans took over the legislature in 2010, we had a Medicaid nightmare. It was underfunded by close to $1 billion. It was the driver of our budget. It took us several years to find the dollars to catch up Medicaid funding at that particular time. Medicaid at that point was $1.8 billion of our budget, about 5% of the budget at that particular time. In this year's budget, Medicaid will take up over $4 billion of our budget. So it has more than doubled in growth in the last 9 years, Medicaid expense to the state. And if you remember, the state only pays 1/3 of the Medicaid cost. The feds pay the other 2/3. So we've had a huge expansion in Medicaid in this state, more than double in the past 9 years. The governor wanted to expand that even more. And in order to do that, the debate has been, in order to do that, there's a cost associated with it. And where the disagreement comes is, do you cut education funding? Do you cut funding to the courts? Do you cut other funding in order to expand Medicaid even further? That is the real driver of our budget today. It's gone from 1/10 of our budget to 1/5 of our budget in about 9 years. And to expand it will do even more. And so that's where the biggest debate's at.
And the biggest debate and the biggest disagreements about this issue are partisan. True?
Most of them are partisan because the governor has been pushing this issue, and so he has made it more of a partisan issue, yes.
Senator, in March of 2007, I think you told Mr. Strack this, you were serving in your second term in the North Carolina Senate, having been reelected in November of 2006, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall whether your party was in the majority or the minority in the 2007 session?
We were in the minority at that time.
And for that reason, you recall it pretty vividly, right? You know what it's like to be in the minority.
I served 6 years in the minority, and I've served, this will be my 9th year in the majority, yes.
And in 2007, during that session, do you recall if the Democratic Party had a supermajority, that is 60 seats in the Senate chamber?
Well, a supermajority would be 30 seats. We only have 50 senators. When I first got elected, they did have a supermajority.
Okay.
And they did for several years.
Okay. And if I can pass out Exhibit 789, please, and then put it on the screen. And I'll represent to you, Senator Brown, that Exhibit 789 is taken, as you can see from the screenshot at the top, was taken straight from the General Assembly's website. And this is the list of the number of Democrats and the number of Republicans in each chamber for all years going back to 1931. And I'm focused on 2007. Would you have any reason to disagree with this chart that in 2007, during that session, Democrats had 31 seats and Republicans had 19, of which you were one?
I think that is correct, yes.
Okay. And that would mean that, as we've said, the Democrats had a supermajority crossing the 30-seat line, right?
Yes.
Meaning that there was very little the Republican Party could do in the Senate to advance its policy agenda at that time, correct?
Not necessarily so. And the reason I say that is when I was in the minority, I worked very hard to push career tech education. I'm in the automobile industry. I've had several car dealerships over time, and I have a very difficult time finding technicians. And I just knew how important it was and how good at paying jobs they were. So I worked with the majority at that particular time to push some CTE legislation to help me and others find those skilled workers that we needed in our businesses. Also during that time, there was a big push to raise the tax on automobiles. And that was at a tough time in our industry. And I worked with Senator Rand and some others to explain why that was not a good idea at this point. And I was able to convince them at that point that raising the a highway use tax on automobiles was not a good thing. So I was able to accomplish quite a few things when I was in the minority.
Okay, well, let's go back to the budget. We've talked about that. July
Okay.
25th, we still don't have one. Back in 2007, the Democrats in the Senate chamber could have adopted a budget irrespective of any Republican input, correct?
Yes, they could.
In fact, even if the governor vetoed it, they had a supermajority and they could have overridden that veto, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so on the biggest issue that we've talked about that faces our legislature every 2 years, that supermajority that the Democrats had in 2007 would have allowed them basically to write the budget on their own, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And at the time, you believed that the boundaries for the Senate districts were at least partly responsible for the Democrats obtaining their supermajority, didn't you?
Well, I will say this, if you'll look at those districts and at that particular time, they're not near as clean as the districts are today.
Okay.
And so the districts today are really ruled by the whole county provision, which has cleaned our map up quite a bit. I'd say our map's one of the cleanest in the nation at this point.
Your Honor, I move to strike the answer as non-responsive. The question was not about the districts today. The question was about the districts in 2007.
Well, he's allowed to explain his answer, Your Honor.
It wasn't explaining the answer. In fact, he didn't answer the question, and I would like to ask it again, but I'd like to strike that answer first.
Objections overruled. We will ask the witness to confine his response to the question that's being asked.
Okay, so my question focuses only on 2007, not 2017, all right? In 2007, during your term in the legislature that year, you were under the belief that the boundaries for the Senate districts were at least partly responsible for the Democrats having obtained their supermajority that we've just been discussing. True?
For me, my district was Jones and Onslow County. At that point, I was in the minority. I had very little say, to be quite honest, other than fighting for issues that I thought was important. At that point in my career, I was trying to get reelected just like everyone else. I was trying to represent my two counties the best I could. The districts were what they were at that point, and that's what we had to live with at that point.
Senator Brown, one of the issues that you found important and were fighting for in 2007 was redistricting reform. Isn't that true?
That is true, yes.
Okay, so it wasn't just your district that you were concerned about. You were concerned about all the districts in the General Assembly, weren't you?
Wasn't me as much as others, because I wasn't in a leadership role at that particular time, but I think that was a concern for sure.
You and your Republican colleagues at that time felt that the Democrats had unfairly rigged the Senate districts in their favor during the prior redistricting process. Isn't that true?
I think a lot of people felt that way, yes.
You were one of them, weren't you?
Again, I was okay in my district at that point, and I wasn't in leadership, so I wasn't involved in those conversations.
You felt that something needed to be done to put a check on the ability of legislators to rig districts in favor of their political party, didn't you, sir?
No, what we did know at that point, and the conversations we did have, is that it was a legislator's role to draw districts. And we knew that the races in 2010 would be important for Republicans to ever consider looking at how districts were drawn. And so we started putting together a plan in 2007 on how we could win the majority in order to not only be able to draw districts, which is the legislature's responsibility, but also that we could push some issues that we thought were important legislatively forward as well. So 2010 we knew was an important election, because we knew then if we didn't win that election as Republicans, that we had no role in drawing districts again, sure, and we would live with districts like we had to run in before. But also the main thing about that election for us was we also couldn't run legislation that was important to us. We were limited on how much of that we could do. So that's why we worked as hard as we did in order to try to get the majority in 2010.
Okay, and of course my question was about 2007, not 2010, so I'm going to ask that
But 2007 really led to 2010.
Okay. So your primary focus in 2007 was on looking forward to 2010. That's your testimony.
I am saying that 2007 we started thinking about the 2010 election because we knew it was important for districts, but we also knew it was important for us to be able to move legislation that was important to us.
All right, can we hand out Exhibit 788, please? Senator Brown, with any exhibit that you're handed, please take as much time as you need and look up when you're ready for me to ask questions.
It's been a while, but yeah.
Okay. Exhibit 788 was Senate Bill 1122 or 1122 entitled, short title, Horton Independent Redistricting Commission, correct?
It is.
It was filed on March 22nd, 2007, correct?
It is.
The full title of this bill was, quote, an act to amend the Constitution of North Carolina to establish the Hamilton C. Horton Independent Redistricting Commission, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree that the idea of this bill was to take redistricting out of the hands of the legislature and place that process into the hands of an independent commission?
Senator Horton at that point was pushing for this. Yes, he was. He felt like that was important to him.
In 2007, you believed that the cure for partisan gerrymandering was to take the drawing of district lines out of the hands of the legislature. Isn't that true, sir?
Again, Senator Horton, this was his bill, and he asked several of us to co-sign on this bill, and we did. He felt like this was an important issue in the state of North Carolina at that time. Yes.
So you just put your name on it to support him, not because you believed in what the idea of this bill expressed. Is that your testimony?
That is not my testimony. I'm saying that Senator Horton was pushing this issue. To be quite honest with you, Senator Horton knew, as well as any of us that signed on this particular bill, that it would go nowhere, and it didn't. It wasn't even heard in committee. And but again, I think what Senator Horton was trying to do was make a point that he didn't think the districts were fair. He introduced this bill with the understanding that this bill would never be heard, and it was never heard.
Sir, at the time you signed your name to this bill, and can we highlight that please in the sponsor section? At the time you signed on to this bill when it was introduced in March of 2007, you believed that the self-preservation impulse of the party in power would lead to the drawing of districts that were designed to help candidates of their party win elections. Isn't that true?
Again, there was a lot of frustration about the districts. Senator Horton was one of those. He introduced this bill to make a point, I think, at that particular time, and with the understanding that he knew this bill would go nowhere, and that's exactly what happened.
There were 19 sponsors of this bill, if you count them up, of which you were one. Pretty much the entire Republican caucus, if you look through those names, right, sir?
That is correct.
Are you going to tell the court today that you were not in favor of redistricting reform in March of 2007?
What I am saying is I think all of us felt like something needed to be done with the districts at that point, or we wouldn't have signed on this bill. But also, we all knew at that point that this bill had no chance, that it would go nowhere, and that's exactly what happened.
You felt that something needed to be done with the districts, quoting what you just said, because you felt they had been unfairly gerrymandered against your party. True?
Again, Senator Horton introduced this bill. We signed on to this bill, and this was to make a statement that he felt like the districts were unfair. And again, he knew that this bill had no chance, and that's exactly what happened.
What was Senator Horton's first name, sir?
Ham Horton is what we call him, yes.
Okay. And did you know that in March of 2007 he had already been dead for almost a year?
I did know that.
Why are you saying he was urging you all to do this when he was dead?
Because he pushed on this for a long time.
Okay. You made it seem, as you were answering my question a moment ago, as if he was urging all of the sponsors of this bill to do what they were doing. He wasn't even alive.
Ham Horton talked about this issue for many, or for the years I was there before he did pass away. Ham Horton was an individual that didn't say much. He was well respected. When Senator Horton stood up on the Senate floor, which was very, very seldom, pretty much everybody listened, because he was one of those that everybody respected, and he didn't just get up and talk just to talk. Normally when he got up to speak, he was trying to make a point. And so Senator Horton, again, was well respected. He pushed, this was an issue he felt dear about. And that's just the most I remember about Senator Horton, was just the respect that he had, not from Republicans, but from any member of the Senate, and just how well he carried himself, how much of a gentleman he was, and just the respect he earned, I think. And I think this was a bill that was introduced really because of that respect for him.
We're not going to go through this particular bill, Senate Bill 1122, because I want to now fast forward 2 years later to February of 2009. By then, sir, you were in your third term in the Senate, having been reelected to the 6th District in November of 2008, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall at that time whether your party was in the majority or the minority?
We were in the minority.
Do you recall at that time the Democrats had a supermajority in the Senate?
I can look at these numbers to be sure.
And let's put those on the screen if we could, John.
Okay. They did. It was 30-20.
Okay, and that was just enough to have a supermajority, correct?
Yes.
Your feelings about the way the districts had been drawn were just as strong in 2009 as they had been in 2007. Isn't that true?
Again, you say that. I don't know that I felt that way as strongly as some of my colleagues felt that way.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is I was fortunate enough to be representing the only two counties I had ever lived in my life. I was representing Jones and Onslow County. I grew up in Jones County, a county that has 10,000 people. I grew up in the tobacco fields of Jones County. That's how I grew up. And I had worked in Onslow County all my adult life. So I was fortunate enough to get elected to a district that had the two counties that I lived in. So for me personally, I couldn't have a better district. It was the only two counties I'd ever lived in. I loved my district. So it wasn't that I hated my district and I was out pushing this issue, because I loved it. I was representing the only people I really knew in the state at that time.
How much did you love being in a super minority, Senator Brown?
Again, I knew when I was in the minority that I had to build relationships, and I did. And if you'll look, if I remember correctly, I think I was rated like the 35th most effective legislator, even though I was in the minority my first year. And the reason that was the case is I would work across party lines, and I would find common ground where I could get some help. And I think most legislators try to do that, even today. We work together on all issues that we can. We're going to disagree at times, and that's a good thing. Good debate is a good thing in the legislature. If we all agreed, you wouldn't need but one of us. But we don't sometimes. We disagree. And we have good debates, and we work through these issues. And there are a lot of bills that pass where you've had good debate and good compromise to the point that nobody is completely happy on either side, but it's a bill people can live with. And that's what the process does.
Can we hand out Exhibit 633, please? We just have the one copy because it is in evidence already. And if we can put it on the screen, John. Sir, Exhibit 633 is Senate Bill 25 that was introduced or filed on February 3rd of 2009, correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, that's exclusively Republicans listed as sponsors, isn't it, sir?
Yes, sir. In this case, it was. I did notice Senator Kinnaird signed on the first bill in 2007. I did notice that.
And you were one of the 14 Republican co-sponsors of this bill, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you said it was mostly your colleagues. It wasn't you. You loved your district, but you knew how much your colleagues hated the way the districts have been drawn. Isn't that true, sir?
Again, some of them felt like the districts weren't fair. Yes.
And they felt like they had been gerrymandered by the Democratic majority or supermajority, correct?
They felt like that the districts could be better drawn.
And there was a general sentiment that not only could the districts have been better drawn, but that the way the districts were drawn was bad for democracy. Isn't that true, sir?
I can't speak for others.
The mere fact that there were 30 Democrats serving in the Senate in 2009 who were able to provide good constituent services to all the voters in their districts, including Republican voters, didn't change the view of your colleagues that the districts were bad. Isn't that true?
Here is what is true, and it was true in '07, it was true in '09. We all knew that in order to change districts, you had to be in the majority, because the law is clear that the legislature draws the districts. And we knew, again, in order to change the districts and draw districts, that we had to be in the majority. And also we knew in order to push legislation that we thought was important to this state, we had to be in the majority. And we worked really, really hard to find a way to do that. And fortunately, in 2010, we were able to win 11 seats that night. And that changed, I think, the direction of this state, because we went from 30-20 in the minority to 31-19 in the majority in one election. And that was an important election, we felt, for many, many reasons. And drawing districts was one of those, because we knew that the legislature, in our history, had always drawn these maps.
Sir, you signed on a Senate Bill 25 in February of 2009 because you believed in the idea expressed in this bill. That was to establish an independent redistricting commission, correct?
If you'll look at this bill, though, it was referred to the J Committee and was never heard.
Okay,
And we knew that. We knew this bill would never be heard. And it was more to make a point at that time that we weren't happy with the districts. But we also knew that the only way we could change it at that point was for us to win the majority, because the law was clear that the legislature drew the districts. And we worked hard in order to win the majority in 2010. And that was one of many reasons that we worked so hard at that time.
I want to focus, John, can you pull up on the third page, paragraph 7? I want to look at paragraph 7 and its subsections. In this bill that you sponsored in 2007 and 2009, Senator Brown, one of the things that was provided for was, quote, paragraph 7, second sentence, in preparing or adopting its plans, the Independent Redistricting Commission shall not consider the following information. A, was the political affiliation of voters, correct? That's what it says?
Yes, sir, it does.
B, was voting data from previous elections. That's what it says, sir?
Yes, sir.
And C, was the location of incumbents' residences. That's what it says, correct?
It does.
So as a sponsor of this bill, Senator Brown, you are agreeing that you wanted a state of affairs in which political affiliation of voters, voting data from previous elections, and the location of incumbents' residences were not considered by the map maker in drawing maps, correct?
Again, I'm going to try to state this the best I know how to say it. Sometimes every legislator introduces a bill or signs onto a bill that you know won't be heard, but it's more to make a statement that you're not happy with something. And this is the case in this. And it was also, you mentioned Ham Horton, out of his respect. Again, this bill, we knew this bill wouldn't be heard. There was no way this bill would be heard. And again, it was more of a statement at that time with how we weren't very happy. But again, that doesn't change how I operated or how a lot of legislators operated. I'm going to take Senator Hartzell, who was in the legislature in the minority at that time. Senator Hartzell was able to work with the Democrats to get a campus in Kannapolis that I think has done well for this state. He was able to do that while he was in the minority. And he worked with the other side and was able to find a way to make that happen. So you have to find a way to work with people if you're going to get anything done in the legislature. And I think it doesn't matter if you're in the majority or the minority. I just told you about a bill that I had that I thought was important I couldn't get passed this year. There were bills that I thought were important when I was in the minority that I was able to get passed. Sometimes it just depends on the makeup of the bill. And you have to be able to work with people and find a way to sell your idea on what is important to the state and try to move forward. And sometimes, and most of the time, that's not very easy to do.
Can we hand out Exhibit 790, please? And while that's being passed around, Senator Brown, you had mentioned in one of your answers that the Republicans won 11 more seats in 2010, and as a result of that, if we can put up the chart again, Republicans were in the supermajority as of 2011. I'm sorry, if you can put up the chart again. So within 2 election cycles, the Republicans went from being a 19 supermajority to a 31 supermajority. Superminority in 19,
Right.
supermajority with 31.
20, I think it was 30-20 to 31-19.
If you look, you can see it was 31, right, correct.
Yeah.
It went from 31-19 to 30-20 to 31-19 in favor of Republicans based upon that election of 2010 that you've told us so much about. And after that election of 2010, did you know that the Horton Independent Redistricting Commission bill was introduced again as Senate Bill 591 on April 14, 2001?
I do.
Let's go ahead and take a look at that, please. And if you could put that side by side with Exhibit 633.
I'm familiar with this bill.
Second page of 633. Let's look at the sponsor section, sir. In 633, in 2009, you had 14 Republican co-sponsors of the Hamilton-Horton redistricting bill, right? Mm-hmm. What happened in 2011, sir?
That bill was again introduced by a Republican, included on this bill, really in honor of Ham Horton. And again, that's how much respect Senator Horton had in the legislature. He and Senator Kennard, who probably agreed on very few principles in government, were very, very good friends. And even though they disagreed, they had a lot of respect for each other, just like we do today in the Senate. We may not always agree, but there's a lot of respect in the Senate. Senator Davis and I think we signed on 8 bills together this year. Who's a Democrat? He and I had 8 bills, roughly, that he and I co-sponsored together this year. And I have a lot of respect for him, and I can work with Senator Davis. He represents Pitt County and Greene County. But I have the utmost respect with him, and he and I work together on quite a few bills. That's the legislative process that works, and it has worked for years. And again, most of the time, these bills pass unanimously. Very few times does a bill not work its way through the process that you don't have both parties working together in support of a bill. Because if it doesn't work that way, it just doesn't pass. It can't make it through the process. And, you know, I think sometimes it's, I think the press acts like we're in the aisles fighting with each other, and that's just not true. That's not how the process works. You have to work with people in order to get things done. And we will do that, and we do it today, and we'll continue to do it. Whether I'm in the majority or the minority, I'm going to find a way to work with people to advance some legislation if I can.
Thank you, Senator. No further questions.
Let me ask whether it's cross-examination by the intervening defendants, by the state. All right, read.
Thank you, Your Honor. Very briefly.
Mr. Strack, yes.
Senator Brown, just a few short questions. Do you recall a budget impasse in 2015?
Yes, sir, I do.
And it took a while to get a budget passed, is that right?
It did.
Did the deadline, did the legislature miss the June or the July 1 deadline then?
Yes, we did.
And who was in charge of the House and Senate, which party?
The Republicans were.
All right, so that had nothing to do with the Republican versus Democrat fight, did it?
Believe me, sometimes I have a bigger fight with the leadership in the House than I do the Democrats. You know, sometimes you just disagree, and you know it's you have to work through those disagreements.
And did that fight also involve a Republican governor?
It did.
Okay. The independent redistricting bills that council has showed you, Senator Brown, Do those bills require legislative approval before they can go through?
They do. You have to introduce a bill, just like any other bill, in order to pass those bills, and they're assigned to a committee, and they're debated in committee.
And if the legislature were to pass a bill regarding a constitutional amendment, then does it have to be voted on by the people?
Yes, it does.
All right. Have you ever participated in a lawsuit asking a court to take redistricting away from the legislature and hand it to some other entity?
No, sir, I have not.
Thank you. That's all we have, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Your Honor, I just have two exhibits I'd like to move the mission of,
Yes, sir.
which are plaintiff's exhibit 788 and 790.
All right. Is there objection?
To receiving 788 and 790.
Not from us, Your
All right.
Okay.
All right, 788 and 790 are received. All right, it's a few minutes before 1 o'clock, so we'll break until 2:30, lunch recess.
Very close to recess.